Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reconvene tonight's meeting. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 Board Workshop for April 17th, 2017. Before we go any further, I'd just like to introduce tonight's participants. Starting with my far right is Mr. Brian Wallace, Director of Finance and Operations, Ms. Lynn Town, Clerk of the Board, and Mr. Matt Handelman, Superintendent. To my immediate left is Mr. Dave Eubanks, Trustee, Vice Chair, Trustee, Ms. Krista Hazel, Board Member, Ms. Tambra Pickford, Board Member, Mr. Tom Hearn, Board Member, and my name is Casey Morrisroe. I'm the Board Member and Chair. At this workshop, public comment will not be taken this evening. Comments may be submitted to the clerk in writing, however. And we'll get going here. We already approved the agenda earlier. So first up is going to be some information from Piper Jaffray on our bond sale. Mr. Wallace. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair Morrisroe, members of the board, Superintendent Adelman. First up, we have our financial advisor, Eric Herringer, with Piper Jaffray, and the goal of the presentation, the conversation, is just to give an update to the board on next steps as we go forward with our bond sale and financing. We hope to close mid-June, and just sort of give you a roadmap on what we'll be doing in the next few months to get to that point so we have the dollars for the construction projects. And I'll give it to Mr. Herringer.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Eric Herringer with Piper Jaffray. I was at one of your meetings in the fall, and then my partner, Michael Keith, I think was at another meeting later on in October or November, presenting a variety of different plans and options for you to consider for the bond vote. And as Brian said, this is really an opportunity to lay out what we plan to do to execute and close the bond sale. So I'd like to kind of go through that schedule and some of the decision points along the way and make sure we're on the right track before we get too far down the line. Fortunately, that assessment said that my number one thing was a producer, like in TV, movie producer kind of stuff. And I've often thought of my job as sort of a production level thing. You're trying to bring in lots and lots of different entities together to execute a plan on a timeline and a budget. So it's a lot of what a bond sale is. Fortunately, investment banker was number 4, which is actually what you would consider what I do. So I guess I can feel good about that. The bond sale plan, so what we want to do is we want to execute the plan that we reviewed and with the district and that you approved for the ballot. You approved that in January of 2017, and of course it received 77% approval. Fantastic. I love these meetings because everyone's excited and happy about the results, and we get to talk about projects. My portion of that is to make sure that we can execute this plan that you presented to your voters. And what is that plan? That plan is to sell $35.5 million worth of bonds, repay it within 15 years, structured in a way that your total tax rate does not increase. So your total tax rate for your bond levy this year is $2.31. Knowing that your supplemental was renewed and this bond passed, our goal is to make sure we come in at $2.31 or better. So that's a primary goal. The financial metrics, which we estimated the net interest cost of the bond at about $10.5 million, and the ability to deliver that tax rate has a very modest growth projection, I should say conservative, at 2% per year for the next 3 years and then 1% thereafter. Certainly your historical growth has been much higher than that, and we expect in the first couple years that it would be well above this. The next bullet point is, once it's passed, then we say, well, okay, how quickly do we need to move? Do you want to sell all of the bonds at once? So there's always a benefit, I think, to get your bonds sold, get the interest rate locked in, and have your amortization set, so you basically take interest rate risk off of the table. You also are able to get all that money, and you get it up front, and you can invest it, and so whatever interest earnings you can earn on top of the principal amount are additional contingencies for your project. So our plan was designed to sell the bonds right away and sell all of them right away. So the kind of the metric for us to look at is, can we do that and keep your tax rate at 231? And Danielle Quaid, who's your bond attorney, will tell us that you need to have the reasonable expectation that you can spend 85% of the money within 3 years. So I think you're gonna, that's doable based on the types of projects you have, but that's something for the team to sit down and make sure that there is that expectation. And that's a tax law, IRS tax law rule. So we are planning to get, and I'll go through a schedule at the end of how we'd get this thing done. And then the last piece, or the last two pieces, is one, we want to maintain in this process, maintain the district's really good, very good, excellent bond rating for Moody's, which is currently AA2. There are only a handful of school districts in the state that have a AA rating, and there's only one Boise School District which has AA1. You have a AA2. I think there's one other district that has a AA2. So you're in rare company. It's a very good bond rating, and to the extent we can keep the bond rating at that level or improve on it, it just helps keep your interest rates low. So that's and I don't anticipate we'll have any trouble making that happen. Yes, sir?
Is there a AAA rating?
There is a AAA rating. There are no natural AAA rated entities in the state of Idaho. There are two school districts that I'm aware of in the Northwest, Bellevue outside of Washington, outside of Seattle, and then Issaquah, which are primarily AAAs because of the wealth levels that are in that community. The state of Idaho has a program that's rated AAA, but it's because there's financial backing and money set aside to support the program. So I can go way into that program, but for this purpose, I think I'll keep moving on. And then finally, we're planning to sell the bonds through a competitive bid process, which is where we prepare the bond disclosure, we prepare a notice of sale, and we put the bond package out and have underwriters bid on that package on a specific day and time. So it's like, standard competitive sale, low bid type award. So the bid is based on who provides the lowest interest rate. And then in our process as your financial advisor is to put that bid package together, make sure the disclosure is right and the notice of sale is written properly. And to make sure we encourage lots of bidders because that's part of the process is you want lots of bidders. In terms of interest rates, we had and I think you were aware of this, following the election in November, interest rates went up pretty significantly quickly because there was a surprise from a financial markets perspective, the outcome. And the initial reaction was, okay, more pro-growth initiatives, less regulation, that will drive inflation, that drives interest rates up. So we knew that going in before you adopted all of your election materials in January, and so we were able to look at that plan that we had laid out in the fall, adjust it, make sure that the goals could still be met. So I'm not concerned with the fact that rates have gone up since the election. In fact, rates have started to come back down a little bit the last week. In fact, this is only, I think, updated through early part of last week. Last week, rates continued to come down. And we should be able to come in well within the constraints of the plan that we laid out. And I'll get a little bit more detail on the interest rate environment. The other thing we look at in the market when we schedule a bond sale and when we're thinking about when to hold this bid is just the supply-demand dynamics in the market. So far this year, the amount of bonds that have been issued, so the supply side of things for municipal bonds, has been relatively low compared to the last couple of years. And that's what the chart on the top of this, the graph on the top of this page indicates, is just kind of the weekly supply, the visible supply of bonds. And I know it's hard to read because it's small, but basically when we're below the dotted line, we're below the 2-year average. And last year was a high volume year. This year is a little bit slower. The other side of that's the demand side, which is on the bottom, and what we use to gauge demand are flows into municipal bond funds. So, like a mutual fund designed for municipal bonds, is money going into those funds? Are investors putting money into those funds, or are they taking money out of those funds? And there was a pretty big withdrawal of funds from muni funds in November, December, January. But we started seeing money come back in at the end of that chart where it's blue above that sort of baseline. Red is bad, blue is good. Blue means demand. We saw a little bit of money come out of the market because of tax time, but this last week, and looking at where the fund flows have been coming back, and that's a good sign because we're seeing more demand come into the market, and this level of supply is still pretty low. So bottom line, it's a good time to be selling bonds, and we're moving forward with that in mind. Sure. So we're planning to sell a bond through a competitive sale, and that's the red is the amount of competitive deals in the market, and the negotiated is blue. So when you do a negotiated sale, you hire an underwriter. You need an underwriter to sell your bonds, unless you're going to go to a bank and have the bank loan you the entire amount of the money. And typically, when you sell bonds and securitize that loan, you're going to have an underwriter do that. In the negotiated sale, you hire the underwriter up front. You say, I want to hire D.A. Davidson, for example. And they're going to come in and they're going to work with us, the school district, and our financial advisor to put the bond package together, and they're going to be the ones that sell those bonds to investors. And so you hire that underwriter up front based on qualifications and whether those, and you get to decide what those qualifications are. In a competitive sale environment, you put the bond package together, and the underwriter is identified through who puts in the lowest bid for that package of bonds. I can go into more detail in terms of you're doing the competitive bid process. Yep. And part of the reason for making that decision in terms of when you look at what do your bonds look like? Is it, what's the final maturity? What are they rated? Is it kind of a plain vanilla bond issue, or does it have some unique characteristics that require having an underwriter at the table to help design the plan at the front end? We would probably not design our plan any differently whether we had the underwriter at the table or not. The question is, do you want to know who your underwriter is going in and direct them? So I think that when you do a negotiated sale for an Idaho school bond, one of the reasons you might do that is to allow for a better marketing for local sales. You can do that and say, hey, I want my underwriter here who can sell the bonds locally, and I want to tell them that that's a focus and a priority. Bonds will still find their ways into the hands of local investors through a competitive sale. It just will be not required at the front end. Okay? We can. I understand. Yeah, and if we need to go through some of the pros and cons and make that part of the process and decision making, we can certainly do that. But right now we're headed down that path of the competitive bid. In terms of the other market dynamics, everyone is aware that the Federal Reserve, I think most people are, that the Federal Reserve has been raising short-term interest rates. What the Federal Reserve controls are just that, short-term interest rates. The expectation has been for 2 more interest rate hikes this year, with currently, or when I wrote this slide about a week ago, a 60% chance or expectation that the Fed would raise rates in June. And that's just the short-term interest rate. The Fed's been raising short-term interest rates, and the market reaction to the impact on your bonds hasn't really impacted it much at all. The March rate increase actually resulted 2 weeks later in lower interest rates for long-term bonds like yours. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to what the speculation on what the Fed's doing. It's more about what's the economic data doing and what are the expectations for long-term inflation. That's what's driving interest rates that impact your bond costs. Just as an update to the plan, so on the left-hand side of this slide is the numbers from January. We're looking at about a 3.07% true interest cost. When we updated these numbers in March the 22nd, and this is, it's a little old now. Rates have come down since March 22nd. We were at a 3.11%, so a little bit higher, not much, but we're actually looking to pay the debt off a little. The weighted average maturity, which is a measure of how quickly you amortize the bonds. Now that we're looking at the actual schedule and how we're going to structure the bonds, the amortization period is just actually a little bit shorter by 0.44 years. So your overall interest cost is actually, we're projecting a little bit less in the current market. And the current market would even be below that. So we should be, and if we keep moving on in a reasonable fashion to get to the market, I wouldn't expect our interest rates to be higher, or at least if they are higher, not much higher than what they thought they would be. I have no concern that you're going to go through that tax rate goal. I mean, again, that's the important metric for us, is to make sure we can keep the tax rate where it's been. And this is that chart that gives a real basic graphic overview of what that plan is and how to stay at $2.31. The red line is the revenue projection in terms of what would we expect to be brought in terms of dollars from $2.31 tax rate, with that little bit of growth that we're anticipating in the next 10 years. So you look at that line and then you say, well, what we need to fit within that, your supplemental levy, which was renewed and increased a little bit to $16 million, the levy for your existing debt, which is the dark blue, and then we structure these new payments for the $35.5 million around all of that to make sure it comes in under that revenue line. And that's, so depending on what the interest cost is on the final interest rates, we can adjust some of the amortization. We might accelerate it a little bit further, because we want to, the quicker we can pay off your bonds at that level tax rate, the more interest cost you save for your community. And so that's our structuring goal that we operate under, until you tell us differently.
So you said, excuse me if you can't ask, but there's $11.5 million interest costs that we have in the previous slide, right?
Yes.
So we can pay it off early and save ourselves a chunk of that, or what?
Correct. If we can amortize that a little bit faster, then your interest cost will go down. If over time, if you refinance the bonds or set money aside to pay it off more quickly, if you pay off your mortgage 2 or 3 years early, the same thing, you save some interest cost.
So if we want to, we could take some money out of general fund, or how we want to fund it on our end and pay it off early.
That's
Taxpayers' interest.
a possibility. Yep, you have that option.
I'm not sure we get that money, Brian, but
Yeah.
if we can pay it off in some way, it would be nice.
Well, and part of that's looking at, before we do the final bond structuring, we'll look at kind of more current numbers on your market value growth for the next year, and to the extent that we're assuming 2%, and it could be, the preliminary numbers could be 6%, for example. I'm not saying they will be, but they could be. And then you would look at that, adjust that red line, and say, okay, I can fit in some higher bond payments, and I can do that from the front end, structure those to pay off a little faster. Yeah, and a good point to make on that last slide, is the $11.5 million of interest cost you see there. Then you also get the subsidy from the state, which is bringing in about $1.1 million of interest cost as an offset. So that's where we come up with the $10.5 million of net cost to your taxpayers. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to get a little over $1 million from the state as an offset. And I talked a little bit about the district's bond rating and how that it's considered excellent in terms of the AA2. That anything in that AA category from a credit perspective, by comparison to your peers, is considered excellent. You're currently at AA2, and again, I'd expect you to remain there. The key things that drive that are the size and diversity of your tax base. So how big and diverse is the economy here? You have a fairly large tax. Well, it's not fairly large. It is large, and it's relatively diverse. You got a lot of people carrying the weight on supporting the bonds. And lots of different industries, lots of different types of taxpayers. You have a low amount of debt outstanding relative to your size, relative to your market value, relative to your population. So your debt metrics are very strong, low debt. You have very good community support, judging by your voted levies. That's the governmental factors, consistency of your operations. And then the financial performance of the district remains solid. I'd say the one, again, the one drawback, the one thing you have to look at, why can't you be AAA? I mean, I think everyone should be AAA that is a school district, particularly those that are my clients. But we have to look at the wealth levels and the per capita family and the median family income in Idaho is generally lower than the wealthy areas in the country that get AAA. And even though there is a fair amount of wealth here, when you look at it broad-based, median family income is going to be below those AAA metrics. So until we can solve that issue, we're probably not looking at AAA. So here's the schedule. Here's where we're headed. Tonight, again, is just a review meeting, no action. Want to let you know what's going on. If there are questions, either approach Brian or Matt or us to address them before we get too much further down the line. But we'll be doing a lot of document preparation. I say it's not necessarily starting on 4/17. It's been going on. We're actually going to sit down tomorrow and review some of the things we've been working on. But the key documents to sell bonds are your preliminary official statement, a notice of sale, which is the item that the underwriters look at when they prepare their bids, the bond resolution, which is the legal action item of the district that Danielle Quaid, as your bond attorney, prepares. We'll also put together a rating agency package to Moody's, again, to try to maintain that AA2 rating. And the school bond guarantee, that's a program the state has. We're applying to it to get credit enhancement. So the state's basically going to co-sign on this loan, if you will, and guarantee our payments. So the investor knows that the state will step in and make payments if you don't. We're not thinking you will not make your payments, but it gets you up to a AA1 rating, and that's what that school bond guarantee is. We've got it scheduled to talk to Moody's on the 27th of April. This is all leading up to having this disclosure document, this preliminary official statement, finalized so it can be out in the market for investors and underwriters to review about 2 weeks before we have the bid. So we're really trying to have everything ready by the middle of May, that May 15th date when we post the official statement and the notice of sale. So in order to do that, we need to get the ratings. Well, the ratings we're going to get on the 12th. In order to get that, we need to be talking to them about 2 weeks prior. Somewhere in here, we've put a board meeting where you actually would consider taking official action to authorize the bond sale, and that is scheduled for May 1st. And that's actually before the bonds are sold, but what we're asking is that you approve the resolution authorizing the sale of the bonds within parameters. And those parameters being that the interest rate does not exceed a certain level, and that level would be a level that, as long as the rates aren't higher than 4%, we're going to be able to deliver your tax rate goals. And that you delegate authority to the district administration or board chair to sign off on the final results. Basically, go forward and schedule everything out, complete the bond sale, award the bid, as long as we meet these parameters. That allows us then to schedule the bid when it makes the most sense for the market, as opposed to trying to match it up with the regular board meeting. If you want to, as a board, look at and approve the final results and the award of that bid to the underwriter, then we would probably need to ask you to schedule a special meeting for that sale date where you could review all the final details. So there's an option there, and right now we're assuming that you'd go ahead and authorize things on May 1st, delegating authority within parameters to complete the sale. So that would be the official action. Then on the 25th is when we'd actually schedule the bids to come in, and we'd basically look at the bids and whatever produced the lowest interest cost within the bidding parameters that deliver, the structure of the bonds. And that's really what the bidding parameters are designed to do, is make sure we're doing something that looks like this. Then we award the bonds to that lowest bidder and move towards closing on the 13th of June, which is when you get your money. So on June 13th, we'd have a wire come into the district from the underwriter for $35.5 million and go forth and build projects. So that's the plan. The participants so far are, you are the district. We call you the issuer. You're issuing the bonds. You're selling the bonds. Bond counsel, Holly Troxel. We're your financial advisor, Piper Jaffray. We don't know who the underwriter is until the bid, so it's to be determined. And there's one other player in the process, and that's your paying agent, which is currently U.S. Bank. That's the paying agent on your existing bonds. And what they do is they're the ones that actually invoice you for the bond payments. So you don't have to keep track of who all owns your bonds, because there's, potentially hundreds of different investors who own your bonds, and send them individual checks. U.S. Bank says, we know who your bondholders are. Your debt service, your bond payment is X. Send us the money. We'll make sure it gets to the people who own your bonds. So that's the function that they serve. And I think that's it. Yes, that's the end of the presentation. And I gave you a fair amount of information there, but we are here to answer questions. If you think about this and you have questions after the meeting, you can certainly direct those through the administration. But we wanted to kind of prep you for that May 1st meeting so you weren't hit cold with, hey, here's this resolution, what do we do with it? So, any questions?
I want to thank you. This has been very helpful.
You're
I
welcome.
can't wait till June 13th.
Yes, yes. And June 13th, one of the things you'll need to be thinking about with, is how you want to invest that money. Because certainly having that chunk of money, it's not all going to get spent out in the first couple of weeks. It's going to be spent out over a period of time. And that's one of the things we'll be talking with Brian and Matt about tomorrow is just, what are the options for that? And that's probably another thing that's going to become before the board at some point is how you want to approach that. So. Step one is getting the money. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Superintendent Adelman, the continuous improvement plan. You have some information for us on that?
Are some documents behind that, including board policy on planning of continuous improvement. Who would that?
Testing.
Forgive me if my back's to you when I'm talking to you. Here, I'll move over just a little bit. That's for you. Sure. So continue on, all the way on page 19 and 20, the legislature last year came out with some specifics in terms of the metrics that were expected in these, and then there were also some rules afterwards. If you remember, those didn't come through until quite late in the process. So those ones listed there are what we were trying to mimic in the continuous improvement plan on page 13 and 14. On that page, on that page 12, what we've done is tried to outline for you an idea of how we'll move forward into the next iteration of this plan now that the legislature hasn't made many changes to their expectations. So we're able to this year set out a calendar so you can see what's going on at the board level, administrative level, and out in the schools in each one of those months between now and when school starts up again. So with that, I can leave this to you for questions or comments. We have our team here, also our instructional core team, who collaborated in creating this proposal for moving forward with the continuous improvement plan.
So Board members, any questions? So, you have one, Tom?
Well, I was just, no, I was, as you were, I think I'm getting feedback also in this thing. I don't know if I am or not. Anyway, I was just thinking about Dave's proposed goal of 100% literacy by the end of 3rd grade. I'm just trying to figure out how that kind of worked into here. I'm not sure if that's, you see what I'm talking about, Matt? Is that?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hearn and members of the board. The goals here you'll find are SMART goals. We've talked about SMART goals before in terms of being specific, measurable, achievable, and time-bound. The 100% literacy goal it can be looked at in 2 ways. One of them is it's a stretch goal, but one of them is it's going to take some time to get there. So you'll see the way the goals are written are really incremental, expecting to get to a point, but not expecting to get there tomorrow or even next year, recognizing that as our teachers dig into all these various assessments and the results, that they'll be analyzing them, figuring out what changes in instructional strategies they need to make. And again, although we'd love to have growth that's faster than this, these were the ones that were set for this year. Does that make sense in terms of answering your question? We can certainly reflect in this coming year's plan that idea of the 100% literacy and how we intend to get there. Very often what you'll do is you'll sort of chunk out, if we want to have that goal by a certain year, that we would say, let's say it's 3 years and we're 15 percentage points away, that we try to get 5 percentage points each year to get to that, as an example.
It looks like you have 5% a year, right, on the reading.
That's what's listed there, yes, correct, in the current plan.
Superintendent Adelman, I have a question. Where's the data, the source of the data that's being used, the percentages, for example, or is it from multiple places, or is it our numbers, or a combination of us and the state, or?
Well, it depends on the individual line item, but this would be our district's baseline or data, not state data.
Okay, thank you.
So, Superintendent Adelman, the public participation portion of this would be really public comment after the admin presents this to the board at the August meeting. Is that the intention there?
Public participation can be anywhere along the way, certainly as we make presentations during board meetings. Obviously, at our regularly scheduled board meetings, there's opportunity. We can schedule a workshop if we want to in between, as you know. That's often what our board does on the third Monday as opposed to the first Monday. So you'll see that there's certainly time built in. We don't have anything else scheduled for that. So if we want to have a specific parent or community input, we can do that at a workshop. Challenge, of course, is the timing of when data comes into us and when we have to submit the plan. Not ideal in terms of trying to get community input during summer months, but it's sort of the hand we're dealt. But we can absolutely do that. Anna Wilson has some comments in the back.
Oh, you're giving it to me?
Oh, it works. Here we go. Also, in looking at the third, I guess that would be row down at the admin portion of it, looking in July, we also, again, working with the timing of when we get our ISAT data completed and back, and then around board meetings, we also have included focus groups to include parents, PTA members, administrators, teachers, through that month and into August so that we can gather input as well and have that input that you were asking for.
That's in the mid-July box there.
Thank you for pointing that out. So you're saying an August workshop, for example, if we were going to do a workshop in August after we've been presented the plan, that's going to be difficult for participation, potentially.
Again, the submission date is October 1st, and so in an ideal world, we would have it approved by you at the regular September meeting. But, you know, we've sort of pushed that before, you know, in terms of, you know, what we had this year was we had the draft plan that you saw in September on the website, and then October, you approved it. It was after October 1st, but it was the first week of October. So we had it there for people to see. And, you know, no one from the state complained that we were a couple of days behind on it. The idea is to have it in place, and obviously we want it to reflect what we're going to do and what we want to do.
Okay, well, as we move closer, board members, what do you think about that? A workshop around that where we're encouraging some participation? I think the sooner we can nail down a time frame on this and what we're going to do, I think the better, just so it's out there. We're not announcing a workshop a few weeks in advance. So I know it'd be something new, but I'd like to see, you know, maybe a more informal type workshop where we're just all there and we can talk to the community. And if people have individual concerns, we get to hear them, as opposed to people just submitting us comments.
I had a quick question about mid-July for it to include parents, PTA, Alliance, administrators, teachers, board members. Besides, I believe this meeting is being recorded. How are we planning on getting that out to the parents that would like to participate in the summer months?
Well, we'd certainly be communicating before the summer months, and we have many methods that we've used for a lot of different communications, whether it's direct emails, our Facebook page, or our website. We can also put out a media release. So, you've seen that those methods used for a number of things, including attendance zone, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further on that? Okay, thank you. I don't see Dr. Orozco here. Are you pinch hitting?
Anna Wilson's going to pinch hit on this one. We've been working and communicating with Dr. Orozco today, but we have some guest presenters as well, and Anna will describe what we have for you.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Handelman and members of the board. So I'm here tonight, and certainly no replacement for her, but I'll try to stand in and punt for Dr. Orozco as we talk a little bit about Thinking Strategies Institute and our work around those concepts for grades kindergarten, really pre-K all the way through grade 12. So we have a little presentation for you tonight. I know some of you have heard snippets of this. You've certainly been approving through our budget approvals, our investment in this work. And I know you've also heard comments from patrons. I know Norm Gissel has spoken about his observation of our work in implementing some of our learning that we've had through these thinking strategies. So you've had little smatterings throughout probably the last few months, and I'd like to maybe share a few more slices of that information with you this evening. So as I mentioned, we have been investing pretty heavily in Thinking Strategies Institute this year, using both Title I funds and also our K-3 literacy funds, which are earmarked from the state to focus on K-3 literacy and our literacy goal. some of you may not be familiar, I don't know if you've looked at this yourselves, about what is Thinking Strategies Institute. So I just wanted to take a second to talk about why we've committed so heavily to this. The mission of PEBC, who sponsors these institutes, and PEBC is Public Education and Business Coalition. They've been around for over 30 years. Since 1983, this coalition was formed kind of in response to A Nation at Risk, if you remember that report. I was just a wee tyke, so I've heard about that. But the mission for PEBC is really that their belief in like ours in investing, that great teaching starts with a great teacher, and that every student can learn and succeed. So what a perfect fit with the work that we've been trying to do around literacy. Clearly, as you know, this is a pretty expensive endeavor, and so sometimes people have asked us, well, isn't this something that we can do here in Coeur d'Alene? Why do we need to go to Denver 3 times a year to invest in professional development in this way? So I wanted to focus on probably 3 main reasons why we have chosen, through research, chosen this particular way of our professional development. First is some of the country's best and most renowned reading researchers are affiliated with these thinking strategies. Some names like Ellen Keene, Patrick Allen, Sam Bennett, major writers and researchers in proficient reading research. And so for us to go and have a presentation, literally the last time I went, all 3 presented to us, is just incredible. It's an experience like no other that I've had professionally, to have such top national leading people in this area. So that would be 1. 2 is the immersion that we have as learners in the experience. So we're there for a week. We commit to, we leave on a Sunday, we get back typically very late on Thursday night. So it's a week's worth of learning. And we're really immersed in the culture of what makes a good reader, what makes a good thinker, we're learning the language of thinking strategies and the workshop model that we've talked to you previously about. Kind of like if you think about it when you're learning a foreign language, it's one thing to learn it and maybe speak it in class or listen to it on, Rosetta Stone. It's another thing to immerse yourself in the country and really commit to being there and experiencing the entire culture of this language or this culture that you're trying to learn. So maybe if you can liken those 2 things. And finally, the lab experience is like no other. So literally last time we went, I was up on a bus actually by 7 a.m. traveling out to see Patrick Allen, who's one of these major researchers, in his classroom. We're working with students twice, so 2 days, full days. It was rather exhausting, but pretty powerful stuff. It's one of the things to note about this is throughout the Denver metro area. So when you talk about, well, that's fine for kids at that school, at an Issaquah, an A3 school rating, for example, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing people working with kids from very high needs and sometimes very impoverished communities and schools within that district. And you kind of get this sense of, well, if those kids can do it, right? Our kids can certainly do it. We're right there in the struggle with them. So I would say that, our research has been, those are the 3 main reasons why we choose to invest in this way. And hopefully those 3 will kind of illustrate our commitment. I wanted to talk a little bit about the learning of our teachers, and we wanted to illustrate that a little bit tonight by maybe some testimonials, or we have some guests here with us, and really remembering that our focus is that our teachers who are here this evening are speaking on behalf of others who have been there, our leaders are speaking on behalf of others, and what we are hoping is, not just hoping, what we're seeing is that in our classrooms, we are noticing improvements. We are noticing this translating to our classrooms here in Coeur d'Alene, and some very rich learning experiences for our kids. So first, let me introduce the team to you this evening. We will have Fernand team. Principal Rutherford is here with Rebecca Webb, and they are going to be talking about their experiences, and you'll even get to see a little snippet of Rebecca working with a student in a video. And really, we're hoping that the video illustrates how well Rebecca knows her student as a reader. So it's one thing to have a test such as an IRI tell you what a student knows about what they're reading. It's totally different to be able to confer with a student, and Rebecca knows her students, and you'll see that through her video. And then following them, we'll hear from Crystal Cabessa, principal at Ramsey, who has not only been to Thinking Strategies once, but twice, the second time on her own dime, because she was so moved by what she saw and committed to taking a team back again to experience that with them. And also Summer Comfort, first grade teacher at Ramsey. And I think when you look at the video snippet from her room, you'll see that what's happening in classrooms is real choice for real readers, just an authentic reading experience. And we'll end with that this evening and then have time for you to ask any of us comments or questions. So, Principal Rutherford, thank you.
Good evening, Superintendent Adelman, board members. I really want you to know that this was different. We've had professional development, and we know how to sit and listen. This is different, and I think what you'll see by walking through our schools, and particularly Fernand, because that's the school I know the best, is that we see kids not just working, not just compliant, but we see kids engaged. And they're engaged because of how we question kids now using the thinking strategies, and how our teachers are really super focused on what a kid really knows and how to explain what they know, and then how to bring out their knowledge instead of just really understanding what they comprehend, really knowing what they think. And it's changed the way our students learn. I think you'll see the benefit on ISAT scores. I think that super critical thinking is now kids don't just want to answer a question. Now their focus is why? Why does this work the way it does? And how do I know? How do I know by my background information, by my schema? How do I know by what I might infer in the future? And what do I know by what I read? I had this awesome opportunity to take 5 of my teachers there in February, and I focused on our teachers that are teacher leaders that also now are training the rest of our staff every 2 weeks. So our staff now has fully embraced the thinking strategies, and it fits perfectly with our workshop model, and it fits perfectly with our project-based learning. So it's not a pendulum swing that takes us way to this new, different kind of learning. It's just a pendulum wiggle, and that pendulum stays in the center of learning for great research, great learning, great educational understanding of what really makes kids learn. And I was overwhelmed, and I don't get overwhelmed very easily. I was overwhelmed because of the great speakers we saw, and by the knowledge of these incredible minds, and by typical teachers teaching in typical classrooms amazing things, and by kids learning. I wanted to take off my principal hat and put on my kid hat and sit on the couch next to the other kids and read with them. And it's pretty engaging. And you come to my school anytime you want and see how it really works. So I'm going to introduce one of my teachers who I think is awesome, as she knows, Rebecca, or Becky Webb. And she joined me with 4 other teachers in Denver.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and share this amazing opportunity that I was given. I feel really grateful for it. I have to say, one of the things that struck me the most when we first got there was that all of our keynote speakers, who are researchers, who are published authors, and who travel around speaking, they're all teaching still in the classroom. And most of them came and took just a half-day sub to come and speak, and then were still in their classrooms that very day. So just the passion they have for continuing to grow and learn as educators was really inspiring to me. A couple of things just to keep it quick, because I know there are others. Just the increased rigor that we're expecting out of students with these thinking strategies. We're really pushing their thinking further and higher with the questioning that we do as teachers through the thinking strategies. And therefore, they're pushing each other's thinking. During our reflection time every day, you'll see multiple times a day in our classrooms when the students are asking each other deeper questions and kind of wearing the teacher hat and taking over in those ways, which is just really fun to see. And they'll say, well, I didn't really understand what you meant by, can you clarify? Well, I was thinking that kind of relates back to, I mean, they're just really taking it to that next level with each other. Another thing that I just loved that the Denver Thinking Strategies Institute and all the workshop classrooms there really exemplify our kids managing themselves and their own learning. So they really own that classroom, they own their learning, and they want to pursue things in their own interests at just those higher levels. That's something that's really evident at all the classrooms we saw there and within all the professionals that we heard speak. I feel like within that type of classroom, you get to differentiate more naturally, and across different levels, you get a lot more time built in for one-on-one with students and small groups. I've had a lot of parents this year really appreciate that. They're like, it just seems like you get a lot more time with my kid while the other kids are really thinking and learning on their own in individual ways because they've been empowered to do so, and they want to because they're eager and they're passionate and they know there's choice within their learning in the classroom each day. And then just the thinking and strategies really reach across disciplines. It's mainly a literacy institute that you go to, but it's really easy to see how all of the thinking strategies can apply to math, science, all the STEM stuff, for example, that we do at Fernan. Our kids are using that language throughout the day in all different areas. It's just kind of almost a language they speak instead of just a set of strategies for literacy. So I just think that's really powerful that that's part of their language as learners. And they're taking it home, they're extending it. I'm always hearing parents, talk about what their kids are bringing home under the umbrella of the thinking strategies. So a super amazing opportunity I feel really grateful for. So thank you. Oh, okay. Do I want to see it?
You do want to see it, yeah. So just a quick, I think, minute and a half, 2-minute video from Rebecca's room to get a flavor for how this looks.
Really get the taco part. So I'm gonna read it again.
I love that. I love that you're rereading it because you didn't get a part of it. That's amazing.
And plus, one just took it, so I was like, okay.
Okay, you're like, I'll just come back to this then. How do you feel like it's going? Really well.
You can sit down.
I have to start a new page for you. It's a good thing that's happening. Why'd you choose that?
I don't know, just because, it's because I didn't get the evil taco part, so I really wanted to like again. So maybe this time I can get it because Logan was I need to read this. I need to read this.
And you're like, no, I need to clarify. Okay, maybe you can help for me for a little bit.
Okay, let's get out of here. This water. Oh, this water. Okay, I get. Ah! Is that the vacuum? And the vacuum sucking up almost all the water, and then it's gonna explode. And his name is Pete.
What do you think about PD?
It's a kitty.
Is he funny? You connect to him. How you like all those funny characters, huh? Yeah.
I know, and especially in the second one, it was really good because he made this love blaster and he blasted everyone.
That's funny. See, I haven't read the second one. That's funny. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
You've read this one?
Yeah, I've read this one. I haven't read the second one.
Wait, did you read it at school? Did you
No,
read it?
I read it with Jackson now.
Wait, did you do this on?
No, I have another copy of it.
Oh,
Look at that. I know. I know. I'm a book sucker.
So what Becky's doing there is called conferring. So she's going through what the child's read and trying to get her to more deeply understand the book and to make connections. And they made the connection, obviously, to that she read the book at home with her son, and that was important to Ethany, the little girl who she was reading with.
That was her second time reading that book,
and you couldn't really hear the awesome things that were being said. But she has a notebook, so every day she writes down new things that she understands and then the goals for the child. So when she leaves the conferring, the child has a goal for that day, something she's going to focus on. And oh, I had another awesome thought. But anyway, you can come watch it work. Like I said, it's pretty impressive. Now, the awesome principal from Ramsey.
Mr. Rutherford, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
You know, my only, this is not in any way a criticism, it's only a question, how is this, can you explain to me how this is like qualitatively different than what you've done before? Because sometimes I don't, you know, I've heard in just the 4 years I've been on the board, occasionally the teacher will say, well, it's another new trend and, you know, it'll go away or something like that.
Right.
You know, those kind of skeptical, cynical kind of comments. And I'm not, and I just want to know, I want to have some feel that this is a powerful thing that will last and that it's worth investing money in. That's all I'm saying.
We always know that a teacher's one-on-one direct time with the child is probably the most important thing a kid can do. And that's the point I missed that I was going to say, is I was in Becky's room just a couple days ago and saw her confer with 10 kids. So imagine that one-on-one time that a teacher gets to spend with 10 kids in her classroom during one 45 or 60-minute time period. So each one of those kids are leaving that day feeling super empowered and super important that day because they got the one-on-one time from the teacher, which is a rare thing. It takes away that front of the teach room didactic where the teacher's leading the kids to their understanding and puts the kids in charge of their understanding. We've been trying to do that for years, but we've been struggling to have the method to do it with. And now embracing it school-wide as a thinking strategies, I think gives us that collective thought. So when the kid leaves her third grade classroom, that kid's going to a fourth grade classroom with that same style of learning. And now we have a collective understanding for our whole school. So as a kid goes through their grade levels, they just get richer and richer instruction, deeper instruction, and they have to think their instruction. So I think that, I know that's the power of it. And then my conversation with kids afterwards is, and we say it every time we walk down the hall, what are you reading today? Every kid's reading now. Every kid, it is not just reading, but understanding, and I think that's the difference. We always say, you know, reading fluency is important, but comprehension is more important. This gives us that comprehension part where we truly understand the kid knows what they're reading. Mr. Eubanks.
Yeah, and I visited Ramsey, and I've gone through a couple of these sessions, first grade and third grade, with Dr. Orozco. And while the teacher's reading with the kids or conferring with the kids, what are the other kids doing? Yeah. They're all reading with one another, and the classroom is just awash in books. And there was so much excitement, so much passion for reading and sharing and inquiring. And I mean, it was really, really cool. I think this is something that will help get this district to this board goal of 100% literacy for our exiting third graders sooner rather than later.
I agree. And as you walk around, and I'm sure you felt this, every kid, you would think the independent learning, that kids won't be engaged, but kids are learning in pairs. And every kid in every classroom is engaged, not just compliant. And I think that's where the difference is.
They're not staring at a worksheet.
No, they're not.
Okay?
They're reading,
they're actually reading.
And it's their choice most of the time what they're reading, so it's powerful books for them with lots of teacher, obviously, help.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and allowing me to be here. I just want to jump into kind of what you guys were transitioning into. To back up a little bit, though, I did go to Denver in May with just a small team, and I didn't have any teachers with me. As soon as I experienced it, it was like, oh my goodness, I have to figure out how I get some teachers down here because I thought it was that powerful and that amazing. And already I was starting to think, how am I going to start doing this at Ramsey? How can I start doing this at Ramsey? Well, that meant that I got to take a team down in November, and like Anna said, I found it was important enough for me to be there with my teachers to be part of the conversation that I did foot the bill for it, but I'm just wanting to show that I do feel that it's that powerful that I was willing to do that. And what's neat about the experience, like everybody said, is you're immersed in it 100%. And then what was cool, when you're down there with the team, you go to dinner and you talk about it, and then you go back to your hotel rooms and you're talking about it in the lobby. I mean, it's a continual conversation that you're having, not only with the big group when you're receiving the PD, but then with your small group, and already the planning and the thinking and all of those kinds of things are happening. through implementing this at Ramsey, I do have some teachers that jumped on board right away saying, sure, we'll give this workshop model a try. But of course, it was with some strings attached. They had to do some reading over the summer and do some professional development as a group and spend some time with our coach, making sure that they were ready to implement this right when we started. They have now been fully immersed in workshop for the year. And one thing I've noticed as kind of the bird's eye view looking down is just the genuine love of reading that a lot of our kids, I've been at Ramsey for 12 years. So although I haven't been in, the office the whole time, I've been there for 12 years. And I've also been in the office for 5 years. So the kids that were in first grade are now in fifth grade. So I know these kids pretty well. I've seen kids now in fourth and fifth grade that it was like pulling teeth to try and get them to read in the earlier grades. And now when I go into their classrooms, they don't even want to talk to me. They don't even care that I'm in there because I'm bugging them while they're reading. Or on the flip side, the little guys that are so proud that they are reading, if I go into Summer's room, the next thing I know, there's all these little kids around me and they're with their books and they want to read to me and they want to share with me what they're reading. And it's just so cool to experience that. We have extended resource this year at Ramsey, and we've worked really hard at having inclusion for those kiddos when they can. And a lot of times that is during the reading time because it's a little bit more independent. It's differentiated. Their aide can be in there with them. But interestingly enough, when I've been in their IEP meetings this year with their parents are saying, this is the first year my kid wants to pick up a book at home. This is the first time. And I mean, I've even had fourth and fifth grade IEP students, their parents say the same thing. And that's because they're in these teachers' classrooms that are experiencing workshop. Yeah, those kiddos might not be reading the huge chapter books that some of the other kids are, but they're still getting to choose, and they're still getting to spend some time in text and feel like they're getting to be independent and successful as something. There's always the data piece and the implementation piece a little bit too that you worry about when you start something new. And that's something that I'm keeping a close eye on, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised with the data that we are getting from these classrooms. We still have kids that are on iPlans, but then, they're surpassing their goals. They're well above their aim lines. So I don't know if we're in a honeymoon year or whatnot, but we have been pleasantly surprised with the data that we're seeing, even though we're not doing the drill and kill, for lack of a better term, type of fluency practice. We're still seeing great growth, and not only are they growing in their fluency, they're growing in their comprehension. Thinking strategies have been out there for a long time. Like Anna said, they've been around since, this group has been around since '83. I just think now we're getting a common language and we're getting a common experience as professionals that then is trickling down into the classroom for our kiddos. So without further ado, we have a first grade teacher here from Ramsey. Mr. Eubanks was in her classroom, and I also know that Norm was in her classroom as well and had some great things to say about her. So I want to let her share a few things that she's been doing with her first graders, and then we have a really cute video to send you on your way. So this is Summer Comfort, by the way.
Thank you so much. I guess in response to your question about what's different, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit, because as a first grade teacher, you are always, a lot of times how I began teaching was very teacher directed. It was me in front of the class, everybody is listening, everybody's doing the same thing. And through this Thinking Institute, what has changed for me is I'm allowed to give a student what they need where they need it. So it's very authentic. I can deliver a lesson on phonics, but it's even more meaningful when I can sit next to them in their book where they're stuck on a word and I don't rescue them. A lot of times what I say to them is, your mom and dad, when you were babies, they spoon-fed you. I'm not spoon-feeding you. I am here to guide you, and I'm here to help you, and I'm here to, allow you to grow, but I'm not going to spoon feed you. And so a lot of what we do in first grade is allow them to what I call a productive struggle. So they will come to a word that's an unknown word in a text, and they're using those thinking strategies. They're looking at the picture to help them. They're skipping a word and reading ahead and going, oh, I'll try a word here, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to go back and reread. And so then I get to chat with them about it. And I get to talk with them about if they're really struggling with a word, I can kind of guide them and say, okay, look at the word. What do you know about this word? How can you chunk it apart? So those phonics skills are still being taught just one-on-one as they need it. Not every student that I have in first grade needs the sound of short I, but I will have a couple that do, and so they get it authentically in the text. And that was one of the things that inspired me the most in Denver, was that allowed me that permission almost, because I went into a first grade classroom and watched a first grade teacher confer with students. And I walked around going, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And it was just the thing in my classroom that I love the most is the excitement. They are so excited about reading. And it's one thing to read words and just word call. It's another thing to actually get to talk about the book. And, I think maybe in the video, one of the kids, I'm not sure if it's in this video, but one of the kids said, I don't have to read, I get to read. And for me, that's really exciting to hear a 6-year-old say that. One of the most proud moments for me was this morning as we do a weekend share circle, and the kids are talking about their Easter baskets. And one of the kids kept saying, yeah, but did you get any books in your Easter basket? Because I got the whole Mercy Watson series, So they're really excited about transferring that then home, saying, I had parents emailing me saying, oh my gosh, my kid is asking the Easter Bunny for books. What do I buy them? So for me, that's exciting when books trump candy. But again, this opportunity, by far the best professional development I've ever been to. So it was definitely worthwhile, transformed my instruction in the classroom, and I feel like has transformed student learning into more student-directed and less teacher-directed.
Can I commend you for one thing? I've never seen this before, but I was blown away when it was time to transition the kids to a different activity, into the share circle, out of the share circle. You didn't say, okay, everybody get over here, quiet down, sit down. You just played a little bit of Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. Mm-hmm. It was so calming, so soothing. They knew exactly what to do, and they did it. It was beautiful. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. That was one thing I learned in Denver. I will say that. I loved that piece, and I loved the peacefulness of it. It wasn't me, corralling everybody. It was just a very calm song, and I've got 2 different ones that are constantly on my iPad. Those are their transition songs that as soon as they hear it, they know exactly what to do. Yeah.
I just want to say through our school visits that we've been able to do, Casey and I have been able to watch some of these workshops, and it's been amazing. I love the notes that they take inside their books, and I love watching the interaction in their groups when they're reading with other students, with each other at a really young age. It just blows my mind, and the vocabulary that they're using. I was in a class like, wow, what grade is this? And they're using these words with one another, and not only using them, but they know what they mean. And I loved watching the interaction of the teachers one-on-one, and just great skills that they're going to use with them going forward. The notes, the notebooks, where they take notes, and just making connections. I love watching them make connections and then share them. That's probably the best part when you're on school tours, when you get to interact with kids and they're sharing their connections with the books. So thank you very much for sharing your experience with us.
I'm going to share that the emperor penguin goes to my nose, and Deegan and Julian are as tall as my nose. So if we were all penguins, then they would be the emperor penguins.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Malachi, how do you feel reading workshop is going for you?
I like reading because it helps me grow my brain. But after only one egg survives, the mother and father take turns keeping the egg warm when it hatches. The raisins? No, I don't. The what? Where are they? Parents keep the chick warm and feed after the couple.
I have a surprise for you.
I have a surprise for you.
Yay! What is it?
The surprise is a surprise.
Oh. Is it big?
Yes.
Is it pretty?
Yes.
Can we share it?
Yes.
I cannot wait!
You will have to.
Wait, what? Why?
The surprise is not here yet.
So I will have to wait for it?
Yes.
This is why I wanted to be Gerald. Oh well, if I have to wait, I'll wait. I'm waiting. Waiting is not easy. Piggy, I want to see your surprise now.
I am sorry, Gerald, but we must go wait.
We must wait. Remember you say something. I am done waiting. I do not think your surprise is worth the wait. All this waiting. I will not wait anymore. Okay, look. I will.
Oh my gosh, you gotta love first grade, right? So thank you. We're excited, as you could tell, to share with you just a little glimpse into some of our learning and some of what's happening now in our classrooms as a result. And we're hoping that this is a continuing conversation, that we get an opportunity to come back and talk at different levels about our experiences and the kids' resulting experiences. So thank you.
I just want to point out one thing. Next to safety, literacy is the most important thing we do.
Miss Hazel, you've been waiting patiently.
I have not heard one teacher complain about this professional development. In fact, I've been rushed at high school events by teachers, and not just one, but a couple have actually gotten emotional, teared up because of what they've called a transformative experience in Denver. I don't know what is happening in Denver. Something's happening in Denver, and our teachers are coming back. We can talk about the kids with their books and that they get to read, but the teachers coming back from Denver seem invigorated in that they get to teach, and they just let them back into the classroom as fast as possible. So my question is, how many teachers have attended Denver, and what's the goal? Is the goal district-wide? What's the goal?
Mm-hmm. So we have invested, and I love what you just said, because as you were talking there, I was looking at every word up there on the wall, and that's exactly what this experience is doing. It's very inspirational. This year, our K-3 literacy funds paid for 43 or 44 K-3 teachers to attend. Our title funds are chipping away at all of our principals, all of our administrators, because if you want to come back, it's one thing to be inspired, it's another thing to come back and have those supports put in place like Crystal was talking about, to be able to try some of these things in your classroom. So we're down to maybe 5 principals, administrators, some of them new hires or soon to be hires probably, who have not attended. We also, our special ed director, Mrs. Clark, has invested, I can't tell you off the top of my head how many special ed teachers have attended. I would say probably around 10. So that would be 53 plus almost all of our administrators now. Our K-3 funds continue to focus on K-3. Our title funds we'll be using and looking at to now, I've got a middle school sister who teaches, who's bugging me weekly about when do we get to go to Denver. So not saying that she gets to go because she's my sister, but I hear what you're saying. They too want to go. They want this experience as well.
But do we have a goal in mind as to how many teachers will be that we'd like to see go?
Oh, I see you. All of our K-3 teachers, for sure, will be attending. I know Amy in special ed wants to send all her special educators.
So the K-3 teachers through the K-3 literacy funds, and anything, we'd love to get everyone K-12 there, but it's a question of funds and finding the other funds. But that's where it's starting, and again, we've already started hitting some beyond that, but absolutely the K-3, and then we'll see what we can do from there.
I guess because here's what I'm looking at is we've got budgeting season coming up, and I'm asking simply because I see the teachers engaged, I see the kids engaged, and the problem is funding. And I guess I would like to clarify, district-wide for me doesn't mean K through 12, although that would be great, but just from the standpoint of K through 3 teachers, can we get 100% of our K through 3 teachers to Denver?
Right. And we have a rollout plan, and that's what we're working on. So we know, 44 teachers this year, 44. Our goal is within 3 years to have all of our K-3 teachers there. Of course, there'll be some retirements, some attrition. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get to, we'll constantly be picking up those new hires, but that's the goal. When we look at our Title II funding, we've used Title I, Title II, and special ed funds also to send people there. And again, it's just chipping away. You can't do it all at once. One of the challenges we've really experienced too is just our substitute shortage. So when you take, I'm taking in May, I think I have 26 people on the itinerary to go. That's a lot of subs, and that also puts a burden back here at the building. So we also have to be, it's a delicate dance of getting people there, and they're hungry and they're ready to go. It's offered 3 times a year. How many can we take without strapping our budgets and our system too much at home? So we're working on it.
Is it offered in the summertime?
No. Darn
Okay.
it. Yeah. It's November. This year was February and May.
A large part of the institute, and I was there years ago, probably about 12 years ago, is those classroom visits. And in the summertime, there aren't year-round school districts there enough to accommodate that. So really being experiencing it, observing pre-briefing, post-briefing with the teacher and with other experts is a huge part of it. So that's why they can't do more during the summer.
Can they come here?
That's the other part of it. The 3 pieces of it is being able to be immersed in it. We have talked about, and we have had our contract or our work in West Valley, and you've heard us talk a little bit about being in Natalie's classroom. It's maybe like a little mini version. It's an opportunity. We've taken some of our elementary teachers, for example, to her 2nd grade classroom who haven't been able to go to Denver, and it's a half day. So not quite the full experience, but gives them a little opportunity to kind of get a visual, because it does make a difference. The last time, for example, we were in Natalie's classroom, I was visiting afterwards with a group of teachers who were reading that workshop book. It's called That Workshop Book. And they said, oh my gosh, all right, well, we read chapter 1. We talked about chapter 1 at collaboration on Monday, and I missed what chapter 1 was talking about. Now that I've seen it, now I get it. I need to go back and we need to revisit chapter 1. So it does help having that as kind of almost like a little stopgap. While they're waiting in line for their number to come up on the queue,
And if we lose our grants and federal funding, our title funding, are we in trouble with losing Denver?
We're in trouble with losing a lot of things because
Yes.
that's, about $2 million that we're talking about.
Okay.
But
So-
again, the K-3 literacy funds are funded by the state of Idaho. So
Mhm.
that, as Anna said, is a rollout plan that is written into the plan. That's how we're using a good portion of the money. The trick, you heard Bill talking about how he started with some of his teacher leaders, and we had different ideas, different models, trying to get an entire grade level, for example, say third grade at Ramsey, for example, or whatever it happens to be. And we did let each one of the schools figure out what was the best way, depending on where they are as a school, where they are with their teacher leadership, and with their progress and thinking on this. But again, we offered a certain number of slots to each school, and they figured out whether is it best to have a person at each grade level or a whole grade level go, that kind of thing. So that we've left up to the individual school sites to figure out what's best for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of things for you. One, I just want to echo what Tamber said earlier. As we've been going around on our tours, it's been obvious in a lot of classrooms what's going on, and it's really a re-energizing, I think, of the staff members, as Krista mentioned, but also the kids are just excited to read, and you're seeing the posters on the wall and the schema, and they're note-taking, and it's just exciting to see, and I've seen it in my own kids. So I think it's great, and I'm glad we're doing it, and I'm glad you guys came and shared with us. And I'm glad we have a plan continuing going forward to get more teachers involved with it. So,
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to all the presenters very much for being here.
Thank you. Dr. Nelson and Dr. Cottle, welcome. We're going to talk a little secondary math. It's a tough act to follow right there.
Well, before we start talking about math, I would like to say that we have sent the majority of our secondary administrators to the thinking strategies, and they would love to send teachers next year. Of course, funding is an issue, and so we'll be looking at what we can with building budgets, but it's definitely something that we support at all levels. Well, I will start with my formal presentation. So Superintendent Adelman, board members, I brought some folks with me to present. We have Dr. Nelson and also Ryan Gillespie. Ryan is our mathematics instructional coach for the secondary teachers. So what we're going to do is probably do a little tag teaming through this presentation. Please feel free to stop us at any time for questions, and then we'll do some questions at the end. So here are our objectives for this evening. We will probably not do these in order, but we want to talk a little bit about the current state of mathematics for our secondary classrooms, and also talk about where we'd like to be. We are not where we want to be, but we have some ideas in mind. We would like to talk about some of the gaps. We will review a little bit assessment with you, and we'll also talk about what we've done with our teachers instructionally in the area of curriculum and in the areas of professional development. And then we will end with some ideas for you of a proposed plan of action. So Dr. Nelson?
Chair Morrisroe, Superintendent Adelman, and members of the board, typically I get to stand up here and give you a lot of good news about how our district is performing. You may remember, though, back in June and in July of this last year when we started talking about the second year of our ISAT data and our first year of the brand new SAT, which came online a couple of months before our students took it, there were definitely some areas that we really needed to focus on. And at that point, secondary math was firmly in the crosshairs. We talked to you about, at that point, putting in our SAT summits, which we've now had 3 summits with our content teachers, really focusing on what the SAT is like, and then correlating it back to what our students are seeing on the ISAT. And there are a lot of correlations. Here are our results table to table for you, with the left-hand table referring to our Idaho Standards Achievement Tests, and then the right-hand side, those students in mathematics meeting the college and career ready benchmark as identified on the SAT. The green cells identify the highest achieving district in each of those areas when comparing ourselves to the 10 largest districts, which we typically will do. You'll notice that in grades 3, 4, and 5, Coeur d'Alene outperforms everybody in the state in mathematics. However, starting in the secondary, 6, 7, 8, and into the 10th grade, West Ada beats us, and in many cases, several percentage points higher than what we're used to seeing. We knew that the transition to the core standards about 4 years ago was going to hit us a little bit more, especially in the secondary, but we've been playing a little bit more catch-up than we would like to see. So we started putting in some intermediate steps along the way. With the SAT, of course, they changed the exam, and we were kind of shell-shocked by some of the results that we saw with that. The most important thing that we can say in this as well is that if you do look at the grade 10 column on the ISAT, and if you do look at the College and Career Ready benchmark slides, you'll notice that there are some districts that consistently outperform us, somewhere around the 8 to 10% range. I could point your attention to Boise, I could point your attention to Twin Falls, I could point your attention to West Ada. And we'll bring those districts back in because we've done a lot of work over the last year in our SAT summits, looking at what is working in our state. Frankly, I can stand in front of you and tell you that if you look at our entire state, there's a lot of schools that are really struggling in secondary math. We are not alone in this, but there are some districts who've taken some leaps in front of us that we can learn from as well. So my job is to be able to kind of talk through this and to give you a little bit of that demographic and quantitative background. But like I said, through those meetings and through other things in job-embedded staff collaboration, we have been doing some work through secondary math over the last year. We'll pass it over to Ryan and to Trina to talk about what we've done in both the middle school and the high school thus far.
On that last one, is there a way to zoom that out? I'm sorry. I probably need to get my eyes checked, but I was looking here like I am really struggling. I should probably make an appointment. Sorry. I'm like, do they have a zoom out like I have here? And I just keep zooming till I can read it. Oh, yeah.
Any better? Getting closer?
Closer.
After
I
the
will be
meeting,
more than glad to PDF this to you.
Yes,
That would be
perfect.
perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
At least on this particular resolution, it doesn't look like it goes a whole lot more than that, but
Okay.
we'll make sure we get you there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Last time I was here, I made everybody do math problems, and I promise I won't do that again because I didn't get invited back for a while after I did that, so I won't do that anymore. I want to go back to this very quickly. And if you do look, yeah, we don't have the green. If you look at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we don't have the green. But in my opinion, if you look at those numbers, we're doing pretty well. And I would like to start kind of by talking about the things that have worked at the middle school level for math, and then kind of compare and contrast that with the high school and where we're currently trying to emulate some of the things that we've had success at the middle school level. So I'm going to put this up here, and I'll let you look at it. And then I'm going to translate it into more common language as opposed to educator talk. And so the thing we did at the middle school level, and really it was guided by the standards, was what this says is we took that 600-page textbook that 6 years ago, 5 years ago, when we taught cover to cover, 600 pages, go, 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 go. You don't get to be a good teacher when you have to teach 600 pages in a textbook. All the stories you just heard about thinking strategies and all those artful instruction things, they don't happen when you're racing through cover to cover. So at the middle school level, thankfully the standards were narrow, they were focused, 28 standards, give or take, at the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level. So we went from 600 pages down to a handful of key ideas. Now that change didn't in and of itself improve things, but it opened the space where teachers could go back to focusing on artful instruction again, doing these things in the areas of assessment and instruction that we know to be effective that you couldn't do when you were having to go through the whole textbook. So I do want to share too just a little bit of evidence that it isn't just sort of my opinion that we're having some progress at the middle school level, although there's a lot of qualitative evidence we could put forward on that as well. So if you look up here, on the far left, you'll see 2 years ago, our ISAT. The next one, you'll see last year's. And we have pretty considerable gains in every one of our grade levels from those 2 points. And then we put the state over to the right too, because the state's improving, but we were improving at a faster rate than the state was at our middle school level. And to look at this just a little differently, if you just compare our numbers directly to the state, we're significantly higher, especially in the 7th grade. That's a full year and change higher with our 7th graders than the state average. So we've had success that's just beyond my opinion at the middle school level. And it started with focusing on the key ideas as opposed to having to teach a whole textbook. So let's shift to the high school now. And where we've had a difficult time is there is a lot of tradition that comes with high school math. We're fighting its 80 years of buying a textbook and teaching it from chapter 1 through chapter 11. And in my experience working with our teachers, they desperately want to do those things they know to be best practice. When we have trainings, they walk out excited, but then they get very discouraged when they go back and they start to figure out, like, well, when do I do this? When do I get to do these interesting tasks that are going to take 2 and 3 days when I have to, get through all this in 2 weeks because I have to get to the next chapter? And as a little anecdote for that, one day I went in and it was like a scene from The Beautiful Mind. I don't know if you remember that movie. And the teacher had every day on all of their whiteboards around the room, and they were like on the verge of, not a full breakdown, but they just go, where do I do this? Here's every day with all the content I'm supposed to teach. Where do I get to be a good teacher? And it was a very valid point. And high school across the state has struggled with focus. Like, how do we move away from this? Because there's 130 and change standards, and they're not broken down into Algebra 1 and Geometry and Algebra 2. They kind of just, here's your high school standards. There's 135 of them. Have at it. So it's been much more difficult to achieve that focus. But I kind of want to talk about what we're doing to get that focus. And it started with this. The SAT released, the old SAT was like an aptitude test. They just kind of shotgunned the kids with all sorts of different ideas and didn't really relate to what they learned in class. It was just like an IQ test for math. They moved away from that and they said, well, we want to improve our focus. We want to test the kids on what they're supposed to be learning in high school. And so I don't know if you can see that real well. Can I move away from the podium?
Yeah, you want, would you like a mic?
Sure. You're about to drive the people in the booth nuts, but it's for the best.
Oh, thank you. Does it work?
I don't know.
Okay. Here was the immediate thing that right there? Oh, all right, we're in business. So if you look at geometry, there really wasn't a whole bunch there. But this chapter in geometry got the same amount of time as this chapter in Algebra 1. In fact, most teachers, when you talk to them, and it was not malicious, it was well-intended, we don't have time to spend a whole bunch of time here because I got to get to here. And it was an untested assumption that we've done just for 80 years, and it's just so ingrained in mathematics education that when we stopped to pause and kind of look at this, we started to see that this is where we could start to have some better focus. The problem that we have in this typical pathway is if you go across, geometry makes up about 10% of the SAT, makes up about 10 to 15% of the ISAT, and I'm not advocating that we teach towards this test. I'm advocating that we need to find a focus so that high school math folks can achieve those same best practices as the middle school folks. But 1/3 of our time is spent in geometry. So we create this roadblock where we spend a disproportionate amount of time here by the way, it's all algebra. Then we stop algebra, do geometry for a year. We come back to algebra, and it just wasn't working. It was constraining us on the achieving focus where it needed to be. So that leads us into sort of what our next steps would be. Would you like me to keep going, or would somebody else want to jump in? Oh, okay.
I would just like to say Ryan has worked so many hours, countless hours with our middle school and our high school teachers, and he's very passionate, and he's doing a great job explaining kind of our situation.
Oh, well, thank you. So the idea was, instead of having an Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, where we create this big roadblock, that we want to move to this Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, this integrated model, where it's going to be 3 algebra-based course, where the geometry and statistics play a supporting role, rather than this 1/3 do-it-all for 1 year role. And we have drafts put together. We've had a team of teachers that have worked on this, and I would say the vast majority of our teachers are very excited about this, because they start recognizing that I get to have some time and space to be a good teacher instead of having to do all this algebra stuff at 90 miles an hour. And so if you're interested, or if you want to look, we have some drafts put together. I would guess this is probably more detail than most folks are interested at the moment. But the part that I would just like to draw your attention to, and Trina, can you just push it back one slide? One more, right there. So we build this so that the bulk of the course, of each course, focused on what we see as the bulk of what kids are being expected to know on the on the SAT. So when you look at Math 1, you're going to see a heavy focus on these first 3 chapters. We need to give kids and teachers time to digest these key ideas, and then in Math 2, we got to give them time to be able to go back to those ideas because they're important. And so when you look at this, that's what you're going to see reflected as our main focus. And I could kind of go on and on about that, but I kind of think I got the gist of it out. So I think, unless you want to add something, I would prefer to kind of turn it over for questions, because I'm sure there's plenty.
Just one. This Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, that would be what's been referred to as integrated math? Okay, just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Yes, thank you.
I have 2 questions that are kind of related to that. One is, how does this change? And it sounds like it makes sense in terms of, and just in terms of, again, getting feedback. Not just teaching to the test, but just a logical sequence of how you're teaching things. My questions are 2 questions. One is, how does it meet, or how does it match college entrance requirements? Because they require certain classes, right? I think they do, or at least they used to. And secondly, I guess even more concerning to me is we just spent $1 million on math books. And I guess, and I know you're saying we're not supposed to be teaching chapter to chapter anymore, but I hopefully was money well spent. So I guess I'd like you to answer those 2 questions.
Sure, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Ryan.
Sorry, this is what I do all day. When someone wants to listen, I'm excited. So the textbook question, let's start there. One of we really sat down when we started this work with this group of teachers and said, what is it we're after? And one of the first points was we want to honor the book as a primary resource, not the curriculum. That was the old model. You bought the book to just tell you what to do. But we wanted to honor the fact that we have good books. We bought them for a reason. So when we build these courses, you're going to see right in there is the chapter that aligns with. So There's going to be a little bit of jumping perhaps, but we certainly want to honor the fact that we have books that have quality problems and are quality materials. We want to use them. So that is definitely built into this plan, that those books are going to be the primary resource. This first question was about the college entrance, and we spent a bunch of time working with NIC and talking with the professors that kind of have a lot of complaints for us about what they're inheriting, and that's also reflected here. If that slide where it had those first 5 chapters, there's a reason why SAT put their focus there, because that's where colleges are saying they're running into deficiencies. Colleges aren't complaining because advanced topics in pre-calc are lacking understanding. They're complaining because basic ideas from Algebra 1 are shaky for students. So this really is built in the image too of what we're hearing from universities and places like NIC.
And if I may address as well, I think one of the questions that always comes up is, well, what are the graduation requirements? Idaho graduation requirements require 6 credits of mathematics. 1 being an algebra-based course, 1 being a geometry-based course, and 1 being a math course taken in the senior year. Now, if you think about it, we are actually still meeting everything. And we've already talked to the State Board of Education because several of the districts that I referenced earlier are all on integrated pathways. Those 3 districts that I mentioned, West Ada, Boise, and Twin, have already taken this leap towards there and already outperforming us in many cases 10 percentage points higher than we're at right now. They've seen a little boost. And we've been able to kind of work with them and see what they're doing to pattern the instruction to be able to make it. But I would say in a good majority of students, they're taking 4 years of math, because it's not really a smart choice, first of all, for you to take a year of math in your freshman year, a year of math in your sophomore year, take nothing in your junior year, and then be prepared for a senior level math. It just doesn't work. So a great majority of our students are already meeting and exceeding the graduation requirements in that way. I can certainly talk about the curriculum materials too. When we presented Big Ideas Math to you 3 years ago, you may remember that there was a couple of things that we had talked about. We started talking about integrated approaches at that time, and we just didn't have critical mass to be able to start moving in that direction quite yet. But we did make a strategic move in the purchase. We do have the ability to do a buyback plan if we would like to use their integrated materials. However, even looking at their integrated materials, it doesn't really meet what our content teachers are saying is the most logical approach for them to be able to take a step forward. It is in our back pocket, and we do have the ability to access their materials online in either the traditional or the integrated approach. So we can make it work based on the content materials that we have right now, or we can sell some of them back, get some of the integrated materials along the way.
Over the course of the past month, Ryan has been meeting with our high school math teachers, and they are very supportive of moving towards the integrated. We do have, some logistical things that we'll have to move through, but the big conceptual pieces are supported by our teachers.
And our content teams have been talking about this for the year because, again, we started off our SAT summits with that slide with our data, and we really reinforced the fact that here's where we're at. I don't think anybody's pleased about it, but here's where we're at. So our goal was to be able to make those systemic changes along the way, but we knew that it would not be a flip of a switch. And we still got a lot of work to be able to do it. So our goal tonight is to simply put the pan on the fire for you tonight to see what we're doing. You'll notice that it says on the screen that we'll be presenting to you course pacing guides for Math 1, 2, 3, coming up to you this next May, or this next meeting. We'll be able to share with you even more once this gets refined even more. This is the work of our content teams. Ryan put it together in a table, but we've had meetings with them to talk about really what do we envision this to look like. We've had a lot of discussions to how quick do we make the turn to? Is this something that we can do year to year to year, or is this something that we can push into? And we're getting lots of feedback on that, and that'll be discussed a little bit more in May as well.
Integrated math model and the recent expenditure of $1 million in new math materials. Are we increasing the academic rigor in high school math in our district? And number two, can we expect to see high school math scores go up this year?
Ryan, do you want to talk about
a deeper piece.
Sure. Well, thank you. Those are both wonderful questions. The second one, if I could start there, this change by itself, like what we have here, by increasing focus, I would anticipate we should see a modest bump as we improve the focus. I mean, what you saw up there, I mean, we were teaching everything, and our kids weren't being held accountable for everything. They were being accountable for these pockets of ideas, these core ideas. So yeah, I do anticipate we will see modest improvement, however we decide to implement this, just from this change. Now, the real improvement comes then from the fact that now teachers have the opportunity to start to put forward best practices. That's the adaptive change that follows kind of this technical fix. So it's speculation, I suppose, but for my own practice, the only way I know how to teach is to have a limited amount of content and the ability to go deep and put best practices into play. So that was your second question. The first question, rigor. And I think they go hand in hand. The textbooks have good, rigorous opportunities for kids to learn with. That's why we bought it. They're not being utilized to probably the extent that we'd hope for because, again, of that breakneck pace that we're currently operating at. So this idea is, and that's how all textbooks really are put together. I've worked for Ed Reports in the summer, which reviews these all textbooks in looking at the standards and comparing them. And every textbook is put together with all this content because they want to sell it. You don't sell it if it's only this big. So no matter what you get, you're going to have to kind of take a hard look at, like, well, what's the important part? What are the things we want to give our students and teachers more time with? So once they have that time, the books are going to be wonderful resources to achieve that rigor.
I have another question, and it's about expectations. And this is probably going to be a little touchy, but if kids sense that the expectations are high, they will rise to that level of expectations. And I taught school 43 years, and I've seen that play out many, many times. We have in one of our schools a grading model, and a great grading model has to do with expectations. I'm not going to mention the school, but if you have expectations such as if you don't turn any work in, you still get 50%. If the expectation is you can turn an assignment in anytime you feel like it, if the expectation is you can take a test over and over and over and over again as many times as you want until you get the grade you want, doesn't this undermine what you're trying to do? And granted, I'm only talking about one particular school, but I'm concerned about the expectations, the rigor, and the overall scores going up. Shouldn't we have something to say about higher how can you have greater rigor and expectations like that? They don't go hand in hand.
Well, I know part of the question I think is rooted in sort of the grading component of this.
But grading is expectations.
Absolutely.
Right.
Here's what I can tell you about the rigor and the expectations. And this is from a direct classroom experience. When I started teaching, here's your book. You got 11 chapters. Have at it. You don't get to do anything other than go fast, and you have to have modest expectations. When you teach that quickly, when you write your test, I can't ask that question. I'm not going to ask this question. I got to keep it because I don't have opportunities to let kids have multiple opportunities. So when I taught in that model, I had lower expectations. When I was able to have less content and to be able to go for depth and to give my kids multiple opportunities to show proficiency, I was able to ask them to do way more. And those questions that were getting tossed out because those are too difficult and my class average is going to be horrible, those became the test. Those questions that were kind of in the back of the chapter that had all the meat, those became what I was going to hold kids accountable in terms of proficiency. So for my personal practice, and then what I've seen a lot in the middle school, we're able to ask a heck of a lot more with kids when we have focus and we're going to give kids multiple opportunities to show proficiency. So I know there's tentacles of sort of that grading mindset that are also part of that question. But I would anticipate that this move opens the door for a much deeper level of learning and more rigor.
I hope you're right.
I want to follow up on that if I can. How are we training and scaffolding our high school staff for like professional development? If one of the problems is at the high school level, then how are we professionally developing and supporting our staff to get to, the points that we were looking for? When the new curriculum or with these changes, how is an algebra teacher going to know to teach geometry, et cetera, et cetera? What are we doing for them?
We've got a number of different things that we've been scheming, and quite frankly, the reason professional development has struggled so much is because the ideas have sounded good. People will leave the trainings excited. I can teach math differently, and it's been that time constraint that has just sunk those efforts time and time again. So now that we're making this technical adjustment to open up time and space for teachers, really it's going to be coming back to some of the ideas that have been well received in the first place, but never had an opportunity to take root. So in line with sort of the thinking strategies, one of the big thinking strategies, or the PEBC model, is professional learning should happen in classroom with kids. So that's been a big focus of how do we start to shift, instead of a classroom full of teachers out here away from kids, like how do we start to go into classrooms with somebody teaching with a very focused observation, a pre-brief, a debrief. And so right now we're looking at the logistics of how do we start to move that learning into classrooms with kids, because opening space for teachers, it is a little scary. If you're used to teaching something, I have one day to teach a section, and now you've carved out 3 days, we're going to have to help folks with what do you do with those other 2 days? And we think that learning is best when you're with the kids, actually trying things and reflecting on your practice. So that's, in my mind, where my energy is going, is helping shift that. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Dr. Cottle, I was thinking maybe you could help answer. So, is this like Denver, where
Yes.
some teachers go, but not everyone? Or is this like, here in our community? I know they're not going out. I know we're having teacher in service days here.
Yes.
But are we 100% of our math teachers at the secondary levels, are they participating?
Well, I think it's similar to what we talked about with the thinking strategies. It's being strategic. So, for example, if the board chose to go to the integrated model, we would phase in one course at a time. So that way we could, maximize our funding. So, for example, if you went to the integrated math 1, we would focus our attention first on those teachers. And then the next year we went to 2, we would fold into more teachers. So basically, it's providing that just-in-time professional development for each group as we phase it in, just because we have limited resources. The PEBC Denver Thinking Strategies Institute does have some special sessions just for math teachers. And I was able to work with one of them when I went with our principals this last February. And so Ryan and I and Mike have been discussing, possibly sending some teachers to that, as well as some other professional developments with the Mathematics Center. I don't know if you want to add.
What does this look like in 5 years? Will 100% of our how does this align with the plan for math?
What I would like to see in 5 years is that all of our teachers are not only teaching using the integrated approach, but we're implementing the thinking strategies, that we're implementing lab classrooms, that students are responsible and accountable for their learning, and the teacher is the facilitator. So what we saw in the first grade classroom, I would like to see in our high school math classrooms. I'd like to see students be successful, be excited about math. As a former math teacher, it was always, why do I take math? Oh, I hate math. And parents, same thing, as I did terrible in math. And so I would like people to be excited about math, and that's the course that they want to take. So that's what I would like to see in 5 years. And that our students are able to achieve at the level they want to. Earlier we had a presentation on the 4-year plan, and if a student wants to be pre-med, then we want to help them be successful so they can go on to college, and that includes math. Or if it's a student that just wants to go to work right after high school, we use math in everything that we do, and so we want to make sure that we're helping that student be successful as well. So I don't know.
Just
I
want to add a
answered.
couple of things, both answering Trustee Hazel's question, also Trustee Eubanks' question. So another thing I don't think I've heard mentioned is our use of job and meta collaboration on Monday mornings. So in addition to, I mean, this morning was cross-district collaboration for all of secondary. There's also once a month where content teams get together. So the math teachers from across the three high schools or the three middle schools would be able to get together and work with Ryan or Christina's here too, and again on these very concepts. The way we know that we have buy-in is that we've also had some days, whether they're SAT summits or other, where we do sub out when we can get the subs. So there are a number of different models that we use to bring the teachers along. Like Ryan said, he's an instructional coach, and the idea of having that real-time professional development with the kids is incredibly powerful. It's also it's expensive, it's resource rich, and also sometimes taking your best math teachers and taking them out of the classroom. And we were lucky to pull both Ryan and Christina from other districts, so we took them out of other district classrooms. But to help train and get those teachers to understand not just what the content is, but also those best practices in instruction. So that's one thing. Another thing is just what Trustee Eubanks was talking about in terms of whether the grading sets the expectations. The grading reports the success, I think. The expectation to me in the school I believe you're referring to, and what we're moving to, is that the expectation and the rigor is that we're expecting all kids to do their work and learn. So the success isn't necessarily measured by what the grade is or even what the grading measurement is, but the fact that we aren't letting kids off the hook for their learning. So they not only have to do the work, but they have to prove proficiency. So it's sort of a shift from what you were mentioning. Again, if you talk to the teachers and the kids, are we perfect at it yet? Absolutely not. But we're getting there. And again, the idea is that we're holding all kids accountable for their learning, so that they need to do the work and not just throw it off to the side and say, "No, it's not important to me." So that, again, there's systems set up in the schools to ensure that they're actually doing their work, as opposed to just accepting that they're not going to do an assignment or fail a test, that's okay with them.
Any other questions?
I've got a couple. Just on the Math 1, Math 2, Math 3, can you walk us through a little bit just the development of that? When did that start? How have you've done that? I know someone mentioned the content teams looked at that, and
Yeah.
I'm just trying to gauge a little bit who's been doing that work. Maybe what is the buy-in on that sort of thing.
Okay, great question. This I think has come, again, the tradition of math education, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's there. And so people don't necessarily like to question things, but even as this 5 years ago when the Common Core standards came out, all of a sudden people started asking the question, why do we do Algebra 1 and then take a year off and do geometry and then go back to Algebra 2? Because our own teachers were asking this question. But it was sort of like, well, that's what math does. This is what we need to do. And that question kind of just got louder, and the discontentment with that process just kind of grew and grew and grew. And it was actually at Lake City High School where we actually put all the content we teach up on the wall, and we kind of asked teachers to weigh in on if you're the geometry teacher, tell the Algebra 1 teacher what's most important. And the same focus you saw on that slide happened. The teacher said, well, this is actually, no, just focus here. And then you just focus here. And I think the light bulb went off at that moment that, we're in control of this process. We don't have to just keep doing what we've always done. And so that moment at Lake City then I think kind of grew out. And I think we've just sort of been waiting for maybe the permission. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm not sure who it comes from per se. But to say, yeah, we can move forward with this strong desire to focus our energy and move it towards this integrated model where we're not just leaving geometry as this one year place. So it has grown slowly over 5 years, and then with the new books, and sort of kind of more gentle nudging from myself and from Trina and from Mike, I think it was just a very appropriate time that it snapped into place. And we just sat down there were 12 teachers at the last session last Thursday, and it was unanimous. People were excited for this. Now, granted, I was the one that drafted this off of teachers' ideas for what they wanted to see, but when it came back, little details that we discussed, but overall there was unanimous excitement. So maybe that was more than you wanted, I'm not sure, or too little, but that's sort of been the evolution of this.
I think it's a similar approach we've been taking the last several years in the district to a number of areas, again, whether it's grading or the workshop model, that we have to lead our educators to an understanding of what's important for the kids. And we can very easily just say, you got to do it this way. And 3 years ago when we adopted the math textbooks, we could have said, you know what, we know that in 3 years we're going to be doing integrated because we know that's, this is for your own good. But it is a question of making sure that those professionals are on board and understanding the why. Because once you understand the why and you believe in the why, then the how and the what come. So, like I said, there's been an approach in a number of different areas, and I think Ryan described well that process of learning for our professionals.
So then, I guess my next question would be, how do you see us moving forward? Because I see it is kind of that pendulum swing, right? We're over here now, and we're talking a completely different way, different than it's been done for 80 years. So we're not just going to show up tomorrow and Troy Schuler or Ryan or Dr. Caldwell or Trina aren't just going to say this is the way we're going to do it, and they're going to start doing that next year. It seems to me it has to be a professional development portion involved there. I think it's too critical of an area for us to ignore or hope it's going to be better. And I think we need to put our money where our mouth is a little bit. So I'd rather see you come, okay, we need this. If we're really going to do this, this is what we need. And then it's up to us to figure out if we can we do that? Can we find those resources? Where would they come from? But in the big picture, this is what we need. Maybe we got to say, we can't do that. It's, we got to chunk it up over 5 years, or we got to do this or that. But it's just too important of an issue to hope it's going to get better, or to think it's going to. We need to put our energy, and I know you guys are doing that. We need to put our resources behind that too. Mm-hmm. And I think the textbook was a big part of that. Mm-hmm. From where we were to what we have now. I know that was an important piece of the puzzle, and I hope to see that paying dividends going forward. But if we're going to make a change like this, it seems like we're going to have to spend some money. We're not just going to put it on a piece of paper and do it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And maybe it's not tonight. Maybe it's when you talk to us in May. And maybe that's already part of your May presentation. But let's give that some thought.
I just
go ahead.
Wanted to say that we need to make sure as well with professional development. I would like to see it be taking place before, say, if you're rolling out Math 1, not while they're doing Math 1, and then not while Math 2. I'm not sure how the plan is going to play out, but definitely beforehand, so they're good and ready and comfortable. But yeah, I'm right there with making sure that we're providing the professional development needed to make this successful. So thank you for all of your time and this draft. It looks great. Appreciate it.
If I may, Chair Morrisroe, Superintendent Adelman, one of the other shifts of communication that also has to happen is with our community, because our community is very used to Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. We're going to have to do a lot of work to make sure our students understand the shift, which shouldn't be tough because they've been integrated since kindergarten. They're used to seeing how things are all moving around, but also to making sure that a parent understands why we're making this shift as well. And that will be happening, again, as part of our presentation to you in May, when we hopefully get all of these typed up into our consistent format. And talking to you, once we have your blessing, then we'll talk to you also about what our current plans look like for not only the professional development side, but also supporting math instruction throughout either the budget cycle or whatever it may be throughout the years.
I would agree. That'll be very important, the parent, aspect, because I have a junior now, and she took Algebra 1 7th grade, Geometry 8th grade, and maybe that wasn't a great idea, but that's what they felt she was ready in. And then Algebra 2, Pre-Calculus, Calculus, and then you go to take these tests, and you haven't done Algebra 1 since 7th grade, or Geometry since 8th grade. That's it. It's like once you do that, you move on. So I've seen it play out in my house, and this more integrated approach, I think, would have helped her where she's at. So I'm excited because I have other kids as well coming up. So that's just from a parent standpoint.
I wanted to throw just one thing out there, and that is that this is such a critical issue, and we have to educate our teachers. We have to make sure they know what they're doing and they're doing the best job possible with these changes. And I think I can sort of speak for the board in that we're with you. I mean, in terms of professional development, just come to us with what you need. We'll get behind it. Wouldn't you say, everybody? Of course you would say. We've got to do a better job.
I think we need to balance. We keep hearing that it's tough. I heard a number tonight thrown out that's $2 million. $2 million. I don't know if we're rough estimating that or for professional development and subs, and I mean, we're
not going to the moon, are we?
I don't know. It just seems like we need to pick a direction, fully fund it, fully support it. But I don't know that that's available in our budget and funding.
Well, we have to make some changes.
I agree. I'd love to, whatever
This
you
is
guys do.
Okay.
After I'm done, I really would hope that we, whatever direction, we fully fund it and we develop our teachers so they hit the ground running, because otherwise I'll be asking which teachers have been to Denver so I can hope to get them. Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to say one thing. This kind of reminds me, I was thinking about it as you were talking about on the state level about 4 or 5 years ago, the governor and his task force decided that they needed to increase teacher pay. So they came up with this 5-year plan to increase teacher pay, and then every year it's been a little struggle in the legislature for them to fund that, but so far they've continued to fund that. I think we're in our 3rd or 4th year of that. So point I'm trying to make is that they said this is the goal, and this is the money attached to that goal, right? It's going to cost you $50 million or $70 million, or Derek would know better than I would about how much they're putting into the pay of teachers every year, but it's increasing every year, okay? With the goal that we were going to hopefully make teachers somewhat competitive to some of our neighborhood states. Well, I guess reason I'm bringing that up is I see this as the same kind of thing, and I think I'm following up on kind of what Casey has said and others. I'd like to see, a 3-year or 5-year plan with money attached to it. This is what the kind of training we need. This is what we need in curriculum. Hopefully we've already spent a lot on that. and this is what we need. And, and we need to do this first year and second year, and this is what we can reasonably expect. The community can expect in terms of increase of our test scores and and kids better prepared for whatever they do after high school, because that's the kind of plan that we can say, okay, because I'll assume I'll be on the board for a few more years anyway, and so I want to be able to say, okay, now we're in the 2nd year of this plan, how much do you need, right? And are we making progress? Well, show me we're making progress. That's where I'm coming from anyway. I'm not sure if that makes sense to the rest of the board, but I'm kind of following on Casey's idea, I think.
It makes sense to me, and it also dovetails on the other conversation about literacy. It would be helpful to board members, I think, to have some sort of I hate to say strategic plan, because you guys know how that makes my eyes roll in the back of my head. But no, some sort of strategic direction or plan as to this is where we're going, this is what you can expect in year 3, this is the number of teachers that we believe we are able to send. You know, we've identified administrators, we've identified our math core, whether it's 1 grade or your strongest teachers as your building leaders for that department. But it just feels like to have a little bit more knowledge as to the roadmap would be helpful at the board level to engage deeper into conversation on that.
And some of our conversation earlier tonight when we talked about the district's continuous improvement plan, we do have goals set forth in there, but we certainly, when we come back in front of you, we can bring a fleshed out plan that includes, you know, the different action items, including professional development and possible, you know, dollar figures.
So the K-3 literacy plan has what you're talking about. And I'm not sure if you were talking about using that as a model for math, or if you wanted to see in math in literacy, because it is there, and that has been before you. We can bring it back. Absolutely.
I would know. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not saying we match the math plan to the early literacy plan. What I'm saying is both of them, I think, could and should be presented to the board as a timeline of what you can expect, like a 5-year plan for your, and I think 5 years sometimes in education still is too changing, but a 5-year plan as to what, like for a math curriculum, we're adopting this series this year. We will do a check back in year 2 to see what benchmarks we think we've met and what percentage, you know, from the outset, set a goal of a percentage that we'd like to see, and then in the review period, did we hit the mark, or did we, you know, and how are we going to recalibrate? And so, you know, wrapping all of it into this is the package, this is the vehicle, this is the roadmap of where we're going and where we're driving the bus to take our kids. That's
right, and I do think that we can represent that to you for the literacy one. We have not presented that to you for math, and we've started to tonight, and we will. Another just point of clarification, I heard one of you say, we talked about $2 million, it's going to cost $2 million. The $2 million figure that was thrown out earlier was our total title budgets for our district. So it wasn't saying that that's how much it's going to cost. It's our annual, approximately our annual title allocation when we're talking about the risk of those possibly going away.
My point, and maybe I was inarticulate. My point is we talk a lot about whether or not there's funding, how many people. I would imagine there are some things we wouldn't know, like what our funding's going to be next year or how many people we know we can send to Denver. But I think that's just going to be a euphemism for professional development. We're sending people to Denver. But there are some things that we do know. We have I just lost my thought. I think there are some things that we do know about a plan and a rollout, and it just, that's the kind of thing that I think would be helpful to board members. And we talk about numbers of, you know, what we do know is we have X number of teachers that need professional development in Y subject. What is that number, or what is the goal? And then, you know, work that problem backwards as to, in first year, we're going to break it out to this group of teachers. Maybe we can send 45. If we hit 44, you know, you can review that and digest it after the fact as to what that was about. But there are just some things that we already do know, as opposed to, well, we don't know until next year and we can't look at it. It just puts us on a reactive trajectory as opposed to a proactive. I guess that was my point. And we've heard numbers kind of thrown out tonight, but I don't know that we have an idea as board members as to, when we talk about how this works with budgeting and whether or not we have the resources. I don't know what we're dealing with, so I don't know what the number is. And maybe you'd knock my socks off, or maybe you would say, you know, hey, we rethink some of the priorities, and instead of going into budgeting season, we reconsider some of this board's priorities if we have an idea at least as to how scary the number is to get our teachers hit the ground running.
We're not going to know the number now or tomorrow.
No,
let's just
we need to move on
because
because
making it a higher priority.
we're running late.
Yeah, we are running late. I'm done.
Okay, so maybe we can look for that in May, maybe, at least a ballpark on that. One other thing, I'm not going to ask a question or ask you to answer, but I'd just be curious how the integrated model works with advanced opportunities or AP courses, dual credit, that sort of thing. So, but we'll save that for May.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a quick request for a bio break, so let's take a quick bio break, and then we will pick up with just 2 items left, the hiring practices and a action item of the ad hoc committee.
Let's knock this little item out.
Okay, so we are back from our break.
John, can we put up the flow chart onto the screen, please, from the board book? Thank you.
Okay, Superintendent Handelman, we are at agenda item F now. A discussion on our hiring practices.
Yes, thank you, Chair Morris, or members of the board. Again, this, like most of the items, this is delayed from earlier this month. As you know, we've had some conversations individually, collectively about this, the development of this flow chart on page 21 of your board book. The pages after that you might recognize, small print, but the comparative chart of hiring practices and procedures in different school districts in Idaho, as well as some other entities in the area across the border in Washington. So, you know, we've been studying what's out there. We've been looking at our policies, our statutes, trying to get a handle on just sort of describing this to you. We feel like this flow chart is indicative of the complexity, I think, of the hiring processes. It doesn't even tell the full story, but the parts that are most new, probably in the big blue box in the middle, is the greatest change, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But I just want to walk you through this a little bit. I don't want to read it to you too much, but the purple box, or purple quasi-ovals, I guess we can call them, are talking about the applicant. So the purple is the applicant. The red part is where we sort of run into either a red flag or an end to someone's candidacy. The green parts have to do with human resources involvement, and then the blue parts really are the focus of the administrator, the hiring administrator. And again, starting with when someone applies to our district, there are a number of things that happen, and a number of changes that we've put into place in the last several months, but including the questions that we ask of people in terms of their self-disclosure. But you can see that we have instituted double checking in every area. So I'm going to focus really on that middle set of blue cells there, where once an administrator has selected applicants to interview, that's in the middle on the left-hand side, and an interview is completed, and an applicant or a top candidate has been selected as a finalist, sometimes more than one. What happens at that point in that big box talks about our background checks, and I know that's been a topic of conversation. So you can see that for a long time we've had a requirement of a minimum of 2 phone references. We added, starting back actually around December of 2015, we started to add Facebook and Google searches as an expectation. We've been refining that, making the expectations clearer to administrators, giving more guidance to administrators how to do that. In addition to that, we started talking back in about October of 2016 about this use of the state repository and how we dig deeper into the background checks than just what statute asks us to do in terms of our FBI background checks, and those are mentioned here in this State Department of Education. So we have checking by hiring administrators, double checking now by human resources, triple checking by consulting with either a superintendent or a director. Again, this is sort of a flow chart, but it can flow in different directions depending on what stage of the hiring process it is and what we find out about applicants and when we find it out. So again, I'm not going to try to walk you through every cell, but just try to make sure you have an understanding of what this is saying and able to answer any questions that you may have.
Board members, any questions on this flow chart?
Okay, I'll start. Hey, when I was hired by the Coeur d'Alene School District to teach at Lakes Middle School in 1997, I was told at the time that I was one of 9 new hires in the district that year, and that there had been 900 applicants in that time, 1997. This district, and I was a good teacher, I had good pedigree. This district was able to basically take the cream of the crop. I mean, you could look at a lot of good teachers and choose great teachers, not including me, but. And here we are today, we've got a teacher shortage. We don't have 900 applicants. We don't have 50, 60 applications or 100 applications per position. It's harder now, where you could fairly easily get people who were squeaky clean and top notch, 15, 20 years ago. Right now, it's harder. And we've just got to do a better job, a tighter job, make sure we get the best candidates possible. And I'm not saying the candidate pool is typically slim pickings. It's just slimmer than it once was. So here's my question. What if the very best candidate for a teaching position in the district is not really very good? Do we hire him anyway, or we just simply say pass? And do we have a backup plan? Should we be hiring people that are flawed, maybe even significantly flawed? And this is, I guess, a philosophical question.
Well, we always want the best person in the classroom with the kids. We want someone who's qualified. So that depends on the situation. We never have to, if you have a hiring pool and you're not satisfied with the people you've interviewed, you can always go back and dig deeper in. You can always go back and repost the position, and we do that at times. You can call it philosophical. Sometimes it's practical also. There's a question of, is one of the people in the pool going to be better than a substitute, if that's what our other choice is? Depending on who the individual is and what kind of commitment we have to make to them based on their experience in the state of Idaho, what kind of contract they're on. So it is, I think the answer to that question is always situational. And you're right, there is a teacher shortage, and we have, depending on the position, that can be a challenge for us. But we are always looking for the best person, and I guarantee that everyone in this room wants the best people and the highest qualified people in the classroom that we can provide for our kids. Again, part of it depends on what the risk is sometimes in hiring someone. Is the risk higher in hiring them, or is the risk higher in having a substitute in the classroom indefinitely? What's best for their learning?
It is the only option to have a substitute. If it's, say, an advanced math or an advanced science class, can we maybe work out some dual credit with NIC so these kids can take those classes there? If we can't find a pretty darn good teacher?
We have those opportunities, and sometimes we also bring back retired teachers. I don't think you're allowed to if you're on the board, though.
That's okay. I always look at you after I talk. I have a few more things to say. When you talk about hiring the best possible, highest qualified people to teach our kids, I'm looking at some hiring practices that go way beyond the Coeur d'Alene School District. I mean, they're all over the country. For example, we have a situation, I believe here as elsewhere, where somebody wants to hire a basketball coach or a football coach. And they get a real top-notch coach, and then they feel the need to keep them fully employed, to make them a full-time employee. So they oftentimes, they meaning high school people, district administrators, they'll put them in a history class or a science class or a health class, when really they're just a coach. They may have some endorsements in some of these places, in some of these subjects, but that's not really their expertise or their interest. And so you end up with that practice, hiring coaches and then filling their day in with some of these, other assignments. You end up with not very highly qualified or motivated teachers. And in all my years in education, I have seen this played out time and time again, and it's very irritating. And we're not ending up with the best qualified people in some of those academic classrooms. And that's a practice I think needs to be changed if we want to improve the quality of education in our district. Would you like another one? Okay. I want to talk about the secondary seniority practice that we have. Brand new teacher comes into the science department or into the math department. The teachers who've been there longer want the I don't want to say the easier classes, they want the better assignments. And the new teacher typically gets stuck with the worst behaved classes, the most challenging classes. And we wonder why 50% of our new teachers nationwide quit within 5 years. I'm thinking, wouldn't it be better to have an experienced teacher, somebody who's been around a while, to take these more rambunctious classes in the beginning? I think that would be a better qualified teacher to be in those classes than a brand new teacher. I don't know if you agree or not, but I believe it is a problem. I also think we have a problem in this district, and where I taught for 28 years in California, we had the same problem there, with teachers who get stale, teachers who are stuck doing the same thing in the same way in the same classroom year after year after year. And I'm thinking it might be a pretty darn good idea for the board, for the district, to motivate teachers to voluntarily transfer, maybe after 5 years or 7 years. If you've been teaching second grade for that period of time and you're starting to get a little stale, wouldn't it be a good idea to say, hey, we can make room for you in 5th grade or in kindergarten or whatever to move you around? I have worked with some really stale teachers in my life. Not so many here, but where I taught before. They're out there, and I think we could improve the quality of teaching by motivating teachers to move laterally within the district to find another position, to get re-energized. I moved around quite a bit in my time in the classroom, and every time I did it, it was like becoming a brand new teacher. I wish we could do more of that. So there are 3 ideas right there to improve the quality of teaching in our district. I have more, but I'd like to let someone else talk, and I think Derek Colas has something to say.
Go ahead, Derek.
With the board's permission, thank you. Mr. Eubanks, while those are common criticisms of hiring practices and assignments, I would challenge you to find that in our district. I know in my school at Lake City, we have a number of very experienced educators who have taken on the most difficult classes. We currently have the department chair of the English department roving this year so that new teachers have classrooms. I took basic freshman English last year to relieve a colleague who was overwhelmed, and that was not part of my assignment last year. I'm one of those a little more dated educators. So while those are easy criticisms to make, having actual anecdotal evidence in our district would be really valuable for you.
This idea came to me from a science teacher at Lake City High School, and it was just a reminder to me of what I've seen in my life in other schools. And the fact that you're saying this goes on at Lake City High School, does this mean it's district-wide?
I just gave you 2 examples of experienced educators stepping in to not have that happen to young teachers.
Let's say something a little different than what you're saying, Dave. You know, it seems to me the issue has been, and Ms. Hazel's been on this a lot, but the issue has really been our background checks being done in a timely fashion. It seems like we've increased now the thoroughness of our background checks, you know, going into Google searches and state repository and all that stuff, and I know that stuff wasn't done in the past, or at least not on a regular basis. One of the concerns I have is, you know, it seems like there's an issue of the timeliness of the background checks, right? We have them done, but sometimes we have we have teachers in the classroom. At least historically, now maybe we're headed in the right direction, hopefully, but historically we've had teachers in the classroom who haven't been through a thorough background search, and that's I think prompted a lot of the angst among criticism we've gotten from the people in the community, and the people on the board have had some concerns about it. So I guess I just wanted, and I know that Ms. Hazel has talked about some kind of maybe possible legislative changes, and she's talked to some legislators about that, to streamline and make that, you know, more efficient and more quickly happen. But I guess I just want to, that to me is like one of the critical issues here. So I guess maybe, Matt, if you could talk a little bit about that, how that's been a problem and how you're changing it beyond. I don't know. I just think that we need to discuss this issue further.
Right. So I think one of the things you're referring to is how statute allows us in every district to ask someone to submit for, you know, their fingerprints and therefore their FBI background check, and come into the classroom and not get the results of those for weeks, because that's how long it takes to get them back. You know, while yes, that's happened, and I'm sure it's happened in many other places, we have for a long time. It's not as if no background checking has been done, right? So there always have been checking with previous employers, with the telephone background checks. And I'll tell you, you know, depending on the position, you know, more and more checks are done, often with people who aren't written down as that person's references, right? So that's common practice. So what we've done to add, you know, I'm sure when Mr. Eubanks applied to us, we didn't do a Google search on him. I bet you anything. We didn't, or a Facebook search. We still couldn't do a Facebook search on you, but those are things that we have recently added, and those again help us, but they don't do the same thing as an FBI background check. Same with checking the state repository, and we found things in the state repository that FBI background checks have not come up with, clearly. So same could be true with Google. So you know, it's this question of having a multi-pronged approach now. So you know, we've always had the Raptor system. You know, we've had different things that we've been able to do. But you have a multi-pronged approach, then you have a more broad net cast on the dragnet, shall we say?
Tom, I want to touch on something that you brought up, which is just the timing of those FBI background checks. You know, in the fact that from the State Department of Education, those can take 10 or 14 weeks before we're getting those results back. And some time ago, we were given something or provided with some information, I think from Kelly, but Blaine County School District down in Sun Valley was doing a little different approach in that they bought a digital fingerprint scanning machine, and they were able to supposedly cut that fingerprint lag time down to 2 weeks. And that's something I would like to see us at least explore, and to get a little more information, you know, ask administration to get some more information on, you know, what is the process, what's the cost, is it really 2 weeks, or because I think there is an expectation in the community. I think if you ask the average parent, they are assuming that those are done before a person's placed in one of our school buildings. So I think decreasing that lag time is an appropriate thing to do. So I'd like to see us look at that and maybe ask administration to do that, explore that some more, and provide that some more information.
I agree
on that.
100%, Casey. I don't think we should have anybody in the classroom who hasn't been through a thorough background check, period. Even if it means we have substitutes for the first couple of weeks or however long it takes to get those in. I think that's a reasonable expectation of the parents in the community, that we don't have people in the classroom who we haven't thoroughly background checked. And I think if getting our own fingerprint scanner and go to that expense what we need to do, then I'm for it.
I guess I have to ask my fellow board members, are multiple misdemeanors that might be DUI or drug related, or misdemeanors with assault, are those okay? Because I gotta tell you, my expectation as a parent is not matching what I'm seeing as a trustee. And we can fingerprint, we can do some things, but look at the list of what is disqualifying. And I'm having a hard time with it. Now, we can add to the list of what might be disqualifying. Those things we can change here locally. Granted, it puts us at a disadvantage for those neighboring districts that don't have an issue with misdemeanors. But I also want to clarify, we're focusing a lot on teachers. Teachers are certified. They have additional ramifications regarding their licensure. The bigger concern is those that don't. It's staff. It's all staff. And more so, I think, in the classified area, simply because we don't have that licensure piece with the classified staff. So I want to be a little slightly defensive for teachers getting all the focus. And the flow charts, I'm appreciative for the flow chart. But one of my major issues is if you look at the disqualifying offenses, there's a lot of felonies that should be there. But it's a repeated pattern of misdemeanors that gives me cause to say, what are we doing? Then we're hiring what the state allows us to hire in many cases. And that can be addressed at the board level, that can be addressed at the state level. But if I use this list and picking out a babysitter, I obviously couldn't do that. So
what I'm hearing you say is we should
I'm saying
raise the disqualifying offenses.
I'm take a look at the disqualifying.
Yeah,
Take a look at, because you're not seeing what isn't on there is somebody who, if they have multiple DUIs but they're misdemeanor, or multiple assault, or they have a DUI, an assault, and a drug-related offense, all misdemeanor level, within the last 5 years. Is that person eligible to drive a rural route with 1 or 2 kids on the bus? Is that somebody we want a playground aide to have access to kids? I don't know the answer to that question, because that to me feels like a board discussion.
And I'm not being critical of teachers, Derek. I'm being critical of I'm questioning the process, that's all.
But until we find out the truth of that information, we shouldn't put them in the schools until we know who we're dealing with, correct?
And those are two different issues. I mean, there's finding out the information. Then once you have the information, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we could certainly have a longer list of disqualifying. And a lot of things that you're describing, Trustee Hazel, are things that, you probably don't see people come to you who have some of those multiples. And so, again, there's one of the things on that list on page 24, it talks about, like within the last 10 years. But certainly, if we see a pattern, that kind of pattern, our red flags are going up. And so we're having those conversations like these say the oval in the bottom right corner. I know it's not truly an oval, but that we are having conversations among and between the hiring administrator, the HR director, the superintendent, or the director, and saying, is this person going to pass muster? Is this person safe with kids? And again, like you said, it might depend on the position. It might not. So, you know, we have these conversations. I think we had at least 2 of these conversations today, at least 2, where we're.
I don't, you know, speaking for
figure out.
myself, 12 votes of no feels like a pattern. I see it. I see multiple misdemeanors.
Which aren't disqualifying, right? And so it's that question of, you know, at what level, and we could bring all of them to the board for. It would have to be an executive session, right, to have that. So that is one way we could do it, at least for short term, to have those conversations.
So how important is the safety of our kids? Is it important enough to do that?
Well, it's a code requirement on trustees. There is no question there.
Yes.
It is put on us.
Yes.
One of my issues has been, I don't know who I am lending my name and reputation and judgment to. And interest, I mean, it's one thing if I make a choice on behalf of my own family for whether or not someone comes into contact with my child. But when we're talking about other people's kids, I'm actually even more conservative. And so that's what I look at is, you know, would I want my own kid with this person or on a bus or around a custodian?
On a team with a coach.
On a team with a coach, exactly. And if I wouldn't want my own, you know, it's one thing if I don't want my own kid, I certainly don't want somebody else's child. And that's what's been guiding my concern. But fellow board members, we have a duty to protect the safety and morals of our kids. That to me is not a philosophical question. I'm one of 5 though.
The question is how we get there. I don't think it's our job to review every applicant. You know, take that away from administration and have executive board meetings every week reviewing applicants.
I don't believe it's our job either.
Another
I agree
challenge
with you.
is also what your standard is might be different than what each of your colleagues is sitting to your side. So that's a challenge that, you know, and again, that's sort of, it's part of our conversation. We can't always predict what you know, the majority of the board, or you know, do we use the baseline of the, using your word, the sort of the most conservative approach, or the most conservative board members approach, not the most conservative, the most conservative approach of a board member, right? And those are questions that are really hard to answer and challenging for administration to always predict. I mean, I think we're getting a better idea as we move through, and it can be more and more challenging to talk to our building administrators who might really want to hire someone. But I feel like we're getting a better understanding of that as we go through this. Sometimes we might also even be disqualifying people who maybe you wouldn't see. At least the majority of you would say, give this person a chance. So, and I think that's actually happened this year once. We had a conversation in an executive session about that. So it's challenging, and we just need to figure out what process you want to use to get more aligned.
I mean, I think when we look at that, you know, it is a judgment issue, right? And everyone's judgment's going to be a little different. You could ask 100 people in this community and get 100 different answers, and probably would. And so that is the challenge. How do we quantify something that's difficult to quantify? And what is the barometer? The fact that someone got a minor in possession 20 years ago when they were a young kid, does that impact the quality of a teacher they are today, or a duty? Or so it's difficult. It's not black and white, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. There's now a pattern of behavior is very different than a one-time offense or something like that. But
I think in that analogy, of course, she gives, depending on the age, if you got a minor in possession and this is within 2 years, maybe there's a discussion there. But if he's 20 years old, I don't know. but versus being, 28, 30 years old, no, there's some common sense that applies to this. And you're absolutely right, it's not black and white. There's always a gray area. But when you hit the really gray areas, that's the part in which I think, if I were to go back to the flow chart and you look at the bottom right-hand corner down below, where we get all the way through the flow chart to the very, very end with consult with superintendent and director, or the hiring process ends. At some point, I think there needs to be an opportunity for the board to get some notice about the gray area candidate and weigh the background versus the position, and then take an idea of take a temperature read of how many of the 5 are willing to approve that hire. And that's a there's no right or wrong. It's just, this is a conversation for board members as to what the board is comfortable with to finalize a hire.
Well, we have to start somewhere, right? Can we agree to not put anyone in a school, a new hire in a school, until we've had a completed background check and a completed fingerprint check?
I don't
That would be the
think,
prerequisite for working in the school.
well, we're not noticed for that
Okay.
tonight.
All right. But just something to think about.
Yeah.
A couple other things, I guess. The things that have been added to Google searches and Facebook and those sorts of things, I think are great. But in the world of social media, right, it's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's Instagram, there's a gazillion different things, right? And I'm concerned about the time that takes, and that we're putting that on either administrators or the HR department. And is that the best use of their time when there's lots of services out there that can do those sorts of things for us? And I know we often evaluate those as an expense, and I've seen some of the numbers around, out there before that could cost $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. But if the HR director, and I don't know what kind of time she's spending, if she's spending 20% of her time doing these things, that maybe she's, is that the best use of her time and that money that's allocated to her salary? So I still think a private background search of some sort makes more sense for our district than a person doing this. Because again, that's a judgment call, and what might bother one person's not going to bother the next. And I think when you get those background checks, they kind of have items they flag, whether it were posts or pictures or.
I would think, and I agree. I mean, those are great things to explore. The Blaine County one, they just started that this year, my understanding. A private firm might have the same challenges that we're talking about here, with their administration. I mean, they could say, yeah, this person legally, they can work for you, but I don't know how they would know your barometer any better than we would. But they would certainly get, those answers on the background checks faster, in terms of those ones that would be a thumbs up, thumbs down. But the other piece we still might have, depending on, on the individual and the circumstance.
I would think the background check is just that. It's everything. They're just giving you the information. Here's what we found. They're not making a judgment call. They're not saying, yeah, this person's good for you to hire. That should be the district's decision. They should just say, here's what we found. In California, they had X, Y, and Z. In New York, they had this. And I like that we've added that repository search, but that's only good in certain states. It's not, it doesn't catch everything. Not every state has a public record system like the state of Idaho does. So there's a number of them, but not all of them do. And I think a paid search service is going to be able to dig a little deeper than we can using public resources. The other thing, there's been a lot of questions of hiring practice and what are we doing, what aren't we doing? Is it up to snuff? Is it up to standard? And I'd like us to at least explore the possibility of retaining a third-party HR consultant that could just come in and review our practices and say, here's what you're doing that's great. Here's where you could, here's some opportunities to improve. These are best practices. Have you thought about implementing this? And I think for me, that would at least build some confidence in what we are doing, that we're on the right path, that, I like the improvements we've made, but is there something else that we should be doing that we're not? And I think it'd be nice to get that outside perspective. I have no idea what that costs, and we've spent a lot of money tonight just with a lot of great ideas. But I think, again, that's something I'd like to see us at least explore and see, okay, what's that look like? What's it cost? Who's out there that does that sort of thing? So we can be confident, but so the community can be confident also that we're doing the best we can, and that we're trying to find the best candidates, and we're following the best practices to ensure that. And I know with 100% certainty, there's not a building principal, there's not an administrator, there's not an HR person, there's not a teacher that doesn't want that in this district. They all do. So let's just give them the right tools so we can ensure that. We're going to make some mistakes. There's 1,000 employees. We're not going to bat 1,000. But let's be real close and make sure we have the best process available to us in the best practices.
I think that's a great idea.
I would agree on both those, both
Yeah.
the consultation review of our HR practices and also looking
Hiring.
at the options with private providers as far as doing the background searches. My only question really would be, what are the services out there and what's their cost?
Yes, I would agree as well.
And I think we provided a partial list of that to you a few weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago or so. We'll bring that back out and add to it. And in terms of finding a consulting firm, we'll have to figure out how we'd want to choose someone for that. I'm sure that like you said, I'm sure there are people out there. I just not familiar with the service. So.
I'm not either. I guess I'm just asking, can we explore it, or, what does everyone think? Do we want to explore that or ask admin to explore that?
I'm willing to explore it.
Okay.
Count me in.
If you need help, I'm willing to help.
Okay, so if you could explore that and report back to us the private background search and report back to us, and then just a little more information on the Blaine County electric fingerprinting. And then,
So just to be clear, there are three things. There's the Blaine County, there's the private background check, and then there's also the HR consulting options. And those are three things.
there's those three things. Then I just want to clarify with the board. Ms. Hazel brought up, the idea of, eliminating offenses, or I'm not sure what the right terminology is, but is that a discussion we want to take up? We're not going to have that discussion tonight and solve that problem tonight. So,
No, that's probably an ongoing discussion for the future, but I would love for us to review if the things on that list are enough.
okay. So that could be a workshop topic in its own, I think. So let's look for some time and we'll continue that conversation.
Thank you.
Is there anything else for tonight that we want to address with hiring practices? We covered it for tonight. I imagine this will be a continued conversation, ongoing conversation, especially with these items that we've asked to report back on and what Ms. Hazel's brought up. Okay, we're not quite done yet. We're close. We've got Dr. Nelson slowly walking.
No, I wouldn't do that to you. Chair Morrisroe, Superintendent Handelman, and members of the board, I knew that you didn't want to end a meeting without having the chance to say aye or nay. Tonight, we can't stop people from continually wanting to be a part of our ad hoc process. And we had 3 new applications for social studies for K-5. There are some familiar names in there. Sam Taylor, who is working at the City of Coeur d'Alene, Robert Singletary, who is a local renowned historian for our district, and then Carrie Stark, who also works at the United Way. All have been associated in some way with our district and do want to inform the board as to possible adoption of materials for elementary for K-5. So we present to you those 3 additional applications for social studies.
If I may, how many do you have on the committee?
Currently are 2. This would make it 5. So we would probably seat around a 10 or 11 person committee overall with our content committee from the teachers.
We have one applicant that's from Post Falls.
Correct.
He resides in Post Falls.
Correct.
And no children in the district.
Correct.
I'm one of 5, but it's a local district. My 1/5 is going to be based off of, I would like to see local to our district on our committees. And I know Sam, and I like him, so I'll have to discuss.
Completely understand.
Yeah.
We did address it with him in his application.
Well, I was impressed by the high quality of the applicants.
Mhm.
You know, I was just amazed by some of the people willing to volunteer their hours. So you know, if that was a dominant, you know, if there were a lot of people who were outside the district, I think 1 I can handle. That's my personal opinion.
It is written into the policy about being a member of the community, isn't it? I seem to remember this conversation from when we were talking about, I think it was a tenant zone, but the ad hoc committees, I believe, are supposed to be. You can always make an exception to your own policy if you want to.
I think we've had this discussion before, and you have to be a resident of the community, of the school district. But I just wanted to throw out there, I know Robert Singletary and Sam Taylor very well, and you couldn't ask for better participation, especially with Robert. You hit the jackpot.
We got work to do.
Yep.
I think for me, I understand the process behind it, but given the fact that although he resides in Post Falls, he is a district graduate. He's a longtime community member. He's involved in the Coeur d'Alene, the city of Coeur d'Alene. So I'm okay with that applicant. Again, I'm 1 of 5. Why don't we break it up here, board? On our vote then, is there any other questions? Ms. Town, how would I do that motion? You want a motion to?
You can motion to approve the members listed individually. It is just the 3 with the stars next to their names.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve Robert Singletary as a member of the K-5 Ad Hoc Social Studies Committee?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve Carrie Stark as a member of the K-5 Ad Hoc Social Studies Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And is there a motion to approve Sam Taylor as a member of the K-5 Ad Hoc Social Studies Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.